Hi everyone, my name's Jonathan Mills, and welcome to my course, Building Web Applications with Node.js and Express. Now, I've been a JavaScript developer for quite a long time, and I love being able to leverage those JavaScript skills, the front-end skills, and building a back-end web application. And I love that I can take JavaScript pretty much anywhere I need to go. And so in this course, we're going to build a web application from the ground up using Node.js and Express. And here's some of the major topics we're going to cover, and actually we'll cover quite a bit. First, we'll get Express up and running. We're going to install the packages necessary, and we're going to serve a basic page. Now, a website isn't really anything without some dynamic HTML pages, so we're going to talk about templating engines and build some dynamic HTML. And of course, we're going to have to talk about a database. Now, in this course, we're going to cover Mongo specifically, but those basic concepts around how we connect to Mongo and the async await methods that we're going to use through that will apply to a lot of other databases too, so understanding those concepts will get you pretty far. We'll do some security with Passport, so you can see how to create users and how to log users in and out. And then we're going to close out with calling some third-party APIs so that you can understand how to call out to a different API and pull data in and use that in your application. Now, by the end of this course, you should be able to build a full-blown web application all on your own. I'm going to cover just about everything you need to know to make that happen. Now, before the beginning of this course, you should be familiar basically with JavaScript. I'm not going to talk about what JavaScript is and how JavaScript works, but I'm going to cover Node from the ground up. So you don't need to have any Node experience, but it's helpful if you know JavaScript. So hopefully you'll join me on this journey to learn all about Node.js and Express here at Pluralsight. Welcome to Building Web Applications with Node.js and Express. Now, this course is going to walk you through getting an entire website up and running with Node.js and Express. And Node's kind of getting to the point where it's taken over the world just a little bit. More and more companies are using Node.js for backend and microservices, especially in cloud-native development and things like that. And then you've got Electron applications spouting up all over the place to run Node in the desktop. Now, one of the most recognizable of those applications is Visual Studio Code, the IDE we're going to be using for this course. That's just kind of everywhere. And in this course, I want to give you the basics to get you started moving in the right direction in building out applications with Node.js. Now, this course is going to be kind of a boot camp, and we're going to get you all the information you need to build out a Node and Express website. We're going to cover just enough to give you all the context, but then let you break out to some of the other courses in the library for a deeper dive into some specific areas. All right, like I said, we're going to build an entire web application from the ground up with Node. And we're not going to use a CLI. We're just going to type the whole thing, so you get a feel for all the different pieces all the way through a Node.js application. Now, first, to get started, we're going to talk just a little bit about Node and NPM. NPM is the package manager for Node, so we'll talk briefly about how that works and how to get the most out of it. Next, we're going to be using somewhat close to the latest version of Node in this course. However, Node changes very quickly, so the latest version now is not necessarily the latest version when you're watching this course. So we're going to talk about how to manage that and how to deal with rapidly changing Node.js versions. Then we're going to talk about templating engines. There's Pug, which used to be Jade, there's EJS, there's a few others. I'll show you what they are and kind of how they fit into an application. We'll talk about automation with NPM scripts. That's what we're going to use to build out our processes around our application. A website's never just one page, right? So we're going to talk about routing and setting up multiple pages and building out the framework for a full web application. Now, most applications pull from a data source on the back end, right? And ours will be no different. So here we're going to look at two different examples of databases. We're going to look at Mongo on one side. That's a NoSQL database, a document store kind of database. And then we'll look at the other extreme of the table-based database. I want to show you SQL Server specifically because there's many enterprise shops, .NET type shops, that use SQL Server. And I want to demonstrate to you that that's fine. You can use SQL Server with Node.js at the same time, just fine, no problems. And last, we're going to consume APIs. In our application, we're building out a conference website, and we'll have a third-party website that we'll use to pull session information. All right, so let's get started. We're going to talk just a little bit in this module about Node, how it works, and all those types of things, and we'll get started building out our web application. Now, just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's take just a minute and talk about what Node is and why we would use it in this situation. All right, so first and foremost, Node at its core is just server-side JavaScript. So when you think of JavaScript, you normally think of the browser, right? You got Chrome, Edge, V8, SpiderMonkey, all of those things. And what Node does is it brings the JavaScript abilities to the server side. So now you can write backend services in JavaScript as well as your front end. In addition to being server-side, it's also cross-platform natively. That means I can run the same code on a Mac or on a Windows machine or Linux or wherever I want to run this. That also includes, think about it, like devices and things like that. So it kind of grows your JavaScript ecosystem into just about anywhere you can think of to run code. And honestly, JavaScript is awesome, right? Why wouldn't you want to run it everywhere? You've got all of the benefits of JavaScript, if you like JavaScript, or the horrors of JavaScript, if you don't like JavaScript. Then now I can run on the server side from my APIs or on devices or wherever I want to do it. And last but not least, right, Node.js is open source. So this is a purely open source community-driven thing that you can use, and you can get into the Git repository, and you can go and you can add to it, and you can contribute back to it, all of those things for Node.js. Now that's awesome. Like that's a great start. Basically, we're just saying you're going to take your JavaScript, we're going to run it on the server side. So in that case, what's Express, right? We've got Node.js and NPM. We'll talk about what that is here in a minute. And then you have Express. So let's talk a little bit about what Express brings to the table sitting on top of Node.js. Express at its core is just a web dev framework, right? It's what we're going to use to serve web pages or serve APIs or to receive requests. Those types of things are all baked into Express. And honestly, it's very unopinionated, but also minimalistic. There's not a lot of heft to Express. It's going to allow us to take requests and send back responses. And really, that's all it does, which makes it ideal for super lightweight little backend APIs that we want to spin up to serve our front end service. Now that we understand what we're looking at here, let's take a minute and go install Node so that we can get started with building our web application. All right, the first thing we need to do, it seems obvious, but we're going to go with it anyway, installing Node. We can't do much with Node.js and Express and all that if we don't have Node in place first. So let's take a minute and get Node installed. Now we'll run out to nodejs.org and look right here. So it automatically detects that I've got a Mac. And so it says download for Mac. And we're going to use the LTS version in this course. And we'll talk about versioning in the next clip. But for now, let's actually look at other downloads because it's picked macOS for me, but we'll click other downloads. And you'll see the options here, right? We've got a Windows installer, a macOS installer. You can download the source code, binaries, all kinds of stuff. So just click the one that works for you. So we're going to do the macOS installer for me. And then we're going to work through this process. Once that gets downloaded, just work through your installer, depending on what version you're on. And then when you're done, open a terminal window. And when you get to a terminal window, just type Node. And if you see Node here, your install worked. If it didn't work or it's not in the path, go back to your Windows installer or your Node installer and work through on getting that done. But if you're here, you're set. So I can go .exit, and that pops me out. One more thing, Node ---- version 14.6.0. That's the version that I'm running right now. We'll play around with that a little bit because here's the reality. Versions of Node change fairly rapidly, and so I'm going to use 14.16 in this course. But by the time you're watching this course, we might be on 16, we might be on 18. These things happen kind of rapidly. So what I want to do is I want to take a minute and talk about how to deal with these different Node versions and when they come out and how to switch easily back and forth between different versions. like I said, we're going to be using Node 14 in this course for the recording of this course. Now, by the time you're watching this course, we may not be in Node 14 anymore. And so let's take a minute and let's talk about what that means and kind of how Node versions work. And then you'll understand like how easy it is to kind of flip back and forth between. So if we go out to Node.js's website, you'll see this release schedule here. And right here in the middle, you've got, Node 14, which from, April 2021 to, about November 2021 is active. That is the current long-term support Node version. Now, every 6 months, a new version of Node becomes current. That's the current thing they're working on. So Node 16 becomes current. If you look down at the schedule, Node 16 becomes current on 4/20/2021. And then Node 16 will enter active LTS 6 months later in October. And so every year, we're going to have a new LTS version of Node. The odd number versions will enter current, but never go long-term support. They're current, and then they'll go away, and the even numbered versions will come along. So how do you deal with this, right? So you might be working on something for work or for a project that you're using Node 16 on. If you hit an issue with a course, or you hit an issue with an open source package or something, you need to move your Node version back to Node 14, that becomes a little cumbersome. Or you just want to play with the latest, greatest thing. So, you want to go check out Node 16 and see what's different. There's a tool we can use that'll let us kind of move back and forth between Node versions pretty easily. So I'm going to take a minute, I'm going to show you that, so that you can, with little effort, play around with different versions of Node. So there's a tool called NVM, and NVM is Node Version Manager. That's all it is. And if we come down to the documentation on the Git website, and you go to install and update, there's a series of scripts that'll let you install, right? And if you come up to the about, it's a version manager for Node.js. Now, one important thing, if we scroll down just a little bit, we got to talk about this right now. NVM does not work with Windows, right? In some cases, with WSL, it'll work, but I haven't messed with that. So there's an NVM Windows. Before I get into NVM, for those of you on Windows machines, there is an NVM Windows. Now, it's not a port. It's going to be a little bit different. And the way it's used is a little bit different. That's totally cool because the needs are a little bit different over on the Windows machine. So just know, I'm going to walk through the Mac version since that's what I'm working on, but just know there's a Windows version of this as well that you can use. So it's Corey Butler, NVM Windows, and you can work through that as well. So if you come back over to the Mac version, let's just kind of walk through real quick. And so this will be Mac or Linux or something like that. Then this is how it'll work. And if you're on Windows, don't check out yet. When I get to the usage, it'll be about the same. So we're going to open a terminal window, and we're going to copy the scroll commands. We're just going to paste that. Now, notice I get an error saying NVM's already installed. Great, because I've already installed it. But if you haven't already installed it, you should get it now. Now, what that means is you should be able to now type NVM, and you get this big, huge doc that lets you know kind of how to use it. Now, I'll skip all of that and just let you know kind of what to do here. And this is what's awesome about it, right? I can do NVM install Node. And what NVM install Node will do is it will install the latest version. Or I can be very specific, NVM install 15. And that's going to install Node 15, the latest Node 15 version, so 15.14. And now if I do Node -- version, I'm running Node.15. Now, NVM install Node just gets me the latest. NVM install -- LTS gets me the LTS version. So that's, in this case, 14.16.1. That's what we're going to be using for this course. So NVM install -- LTS gets you going with the right Node version. Now, if you kind of read through the rest of this documentation, you'll see you can set defaults and you can do a use, and there's all kinds of stuff you can do here. But for the most part, this will get you where you need to be so that you can switch back and forth between Node versions as necessary. All right, so now we're set, right? We've got Node installed, we've got the right Node version installed. Let's go grab an IDE and then get started building a website. All right, now that we've got Node installed, we got to pick out an IDE, because in JavaScript, you can do one of several, right? There isn't really a right or wrong choice when it comes to picking out an IDE. And honestly, I don't care what you use, right? We've got Sublime, we've got WebStorm, we've got VS Code. They all have different options. You can do Vim if you want to, you can do brackets like Atom. There's a whole bunch of choices out there. And so for the most part for this course, I don't care what you use. Pick something that you like, pick something that you're familiar with, and go from there. I am going to use VS Code as I work through this. Now, why VS Code? First and foremost, is an open source IDE, right? So the code's out on GitHub. It's truly open source. They pull things from the community. It's a nice open source IDE that we can use. It's actually written in Node.js. So I'm doing a Node.js course. Why not pick an IDE written in Node? Now, it's built on Electron, which is a framework that lets you take JavaScript, Node.js code, and run it as a desktop application. So cross-platform. So when Microsoft needed to create a cross-platform IDE, Node.js and Electron was the choice they used. It is free. Free as in free. It'll never cost you anything. Download, install. Some of the other IDEs cost money. There's professional versions and free versions. VS Code is free, and it is powerful. If you have experience using like Visual Studio, that's massively powerful. This is a scaled down version of this, but you can still do breakpoints, you can still do debugging, you can do all of those things, and there's tons of plugins that get you where you need to go. So with all that said, let's jump out and look at Visual Studio Code for a second. So code.visualstudio.com. And again, just like everything, pick the version that works for you. So Mac, Windows, Linux, whatever version you're doing, click the little button and get that downloading. And once it's downloaded, do your install, get it up and running, and then you should be able to just open code. If you can get to this point, you're set. We've got Visual Studio Code installed. Now we're ready to actually start writing code. And so from this point forward, we're going to start in on building out our web application with Node.js and Express. And so the first part of that is going to be installing packages. We got to install Express. We got to install other things. So the first part of this is working with NPM. So let's spend just a couple minutes and figure out what NPM is and why we use it. All right, the first thing you have to do with every application is do some package installations and package management with NPM. So real quick, let's start getting things installed using NPM. So if I come into Visual Studio Code, close that welcome page and control tick mark, now we have a terminal window. Now in our terminal window, the first step you should always take when you're building a Node.js application is npm init. Now what is npm, right? Node Package Manager. That's all npm stands for. And so what Node Package Manager does is manages all of the packages that come with a Node.js application. If you're a .NET person, think NuGet. If you're Ruby, Gems, like all of those types of ideas, npm is just packages. So when you type npm init, we hit enter, and it's going to ask us a whole bunch of questions. So we're just going to say, yep, this is our code. We're just going to kind of work through and say yes. And what this is going to do is create this package.json file right here. And we'll get all kinds of into our package.json here as we work through this course. We'll do some scripts, we'll do some other things. But for right now, we want to install a package because that's the first part. So we're just going to do npm install express. And we're going to hit enter. Now notice right here in our package.json, we've got dependencies. That's new. That just happened. Express 4.17.1. Excellent. That's the version of Express we're going to be using in this course. If a new version, if Express 5 comes out, or some other version, and there's different things, if I delete this, dependencies, and we come back down here, we can do npm install express at 4.17. And hit enter. It's going to blow up. Why did it blow up? Because I left this comma there. We're going to save that. Because look at here, right here. Failed to parse JSON. Expected token at position 200. Well, near license, blah, blah, blah. All that means is I was missing a comma right up there. So let's run npm install express 4.17. There you go. It installs that specific version of Express. If we did 4.16, just so you see it works, now all of a sudden we're down to 4.16. So if there's issues with the course because new Express versions have come out and things aren't working, just specify specifically at 4.17 and this will work just fine. Okay, we've got npm and init done. We've got our package.json file. We've got Express as a package. Let's go build a website. All right, before we go build our website, let's take just a second and talk about what we've done so far. We honestly haven't done very much. We've got like very basics done, but let's look a little bit at what we've talked about. So we talked about what Node is, right? We talked about the fact that Node just enabled server-side JavaScript. You take your JavaScript that you want to run in the browser, you can now run it over on the server side, and we use Express to build out all of those pieces with requests and responses and all of those pieces for our website. We installed Node. We went out to Node.js's website, we downloaded Node, we can run Node at the command line, -v to get our version, and then we talked about versioning, because this is going to be important because Node versions change fast. And so I showed you this tool called NVM that you can use to move back and forth between Node versions, just in case you're working on code on your laptop and then you need to go work on a course that uses a different version. NVM lets us work through that. We talked about IDEs. We settled on Visual Studio Code for this course, but there's a lot of different IDEs that you can use. I don't care what you use. The only specifics I'm going to use around Visual Studio Code is that control tick mark to pull up a terminal window. Other than that, I'm not going to use anything specific to the IDE, so feel free to use whatever you want. This is just the one I'm using for right now. We talked about NPM. We got NPM, we did our NPM init, we created our package.json file, and then we did an install of Express 4.17, so we have the right version of Express ready to go. And so over the course of the course, we'll do some other things with NPM. We'll install other packages, we'll do some scripting, we'll do all that kind of stuff kind of as we go. All right, let's go build a website. In this module, we're going to set up our first page. Well, that may seem like a simple thing, just index.html. There's actually quite a bit to it, and in this module, we're going to set the groundwork for building out the entire application that we're going to be putting together. Now, what you're going to learn in this module is just how to do index.html, just a static HTML web page. It seems pretty simplistic, but there's quite a few steps involved in this. So the first thing we're going to do is get Express set up. Let's actually begin by serving a route in Express, just the index route, the slash route, and take the steps to get that all set up. Now, once we're there, we're going to run Express, and we're going to Express going and working the way we want it to. So we'll just do the configuration and get the pieces together. Then we're going to take a detour in the middle of this module. We're going to talk about logging options. And we'll talk about debugging, and we'll talk about Chalk and Morgan and some other pieces that we use to help our logging experience look a little bit better. Then we're going to serve up HTML. We're not going to get into the templating engines yet, but we're going to serve straight up HTML and get that to work. Now, as part of serving HTML, if you want to use HTML and you want it to look good, right, there's always going to be other files. So there's going to be CSS and JavaScript and Bootstrap and some other things that are in there. So we'll have to serve static files as part of that. So we'll talk about the process of serving static files for CSS and JavaScript and just how to make that work in the context of the Express application. All right, let's go get Express set up. All right, let's start by getting our first web app up and running in Express. And so let's take a minute and get Express set up and see what's involved in getting that done. Now, here I've got my package.json file, and that's all we've got so far in our library directory. We've started this in the last module. We got Express set up as a dependency, and so far that's it. And so I'm going to right-click right in here, and I'm going to create a new file. And we're going to call it app.js. Now, you can really call this anything, but app.js or server.js seems to be the standard that most people go by. So app.js is what we're going to call it. Now, there's a couple of things we've got to do right off the bat. So let's do const express equals require express, and that just gets us started. And in Node, we're going to use the common JS pattern. So const express equals require express. We're not going to do ES6 modules in this course. We're just going to do the common JS piece, just so that you know that's what we're doing. Require instead of import, const equals require express. Now, we need an instance of express too. We'll do const app equals express, and we're going to just execute it. Now, you may be tempted to come up here and short circuit this and just do that, but don't do that, right? We'll need express later. It's going to be a couple of modules from now, but we'll need express just on its own to pull routing in and some other things. So leave it like this, and we'll go from there. Now, I like to leave a little space here because this is going to be our list of actual requires, and this is going to be all the stuff that I'm doing outside of the requires. And so it's just my own personal thing. Let's just leave some space. Now, the way Express works is everything works through app. So I'm going to say app.get, and we'll talk a lot about what this means in a later module, but for right now, just go with it. But think about get as you've got a browser and you send a get request to slash. And when Express gets a get request to slash, it's going to execute for us this function. And that's it. That's all Express really is. It's just a series of, hey, when you get a request to this route in this verb, execute this function. It's not too hard. And when it executes this function, it's going to send two variables. It's going to send us a request and a response. Now, we typically in the Node world just abbreviate those to rec and res. You don't have to. You can call them request and response, but that seems like a lot of typing and you don't need it. You, however, can't shorten them any further than that. Like, right, you can't go r or re and re. So you get rec and res. Now, when those come in, we need to send a response. So we get access to the request, and we don't care about that right now. We'll care about that later, but for right now, we just need to deal with a response. So we're going to do a res.send, and we're just going to put a message in here. Let's say, hello from my app. And whenever I send a get to slash, Express is going to send back a message, hello from my app. It's just going to send text. That's all it's going to do. Now, the last thing we have to do to get Express running is to have it listen on a port. So let's just say this, app.listen, and then we tell it to listen on a port. In this case, we'll just say 3000. That's pretty standard, 3000 or 5000. You can do anything here, really, but 3000 is what you'll see most of the time. And then when it starts listening, I'll execute a callback. And actually, I like this from Visual Studio because it'll actually even say right there, see, listen, the port number, and a host name with a string, and then a callback. We don't care about the host name almost ever, but we care about the callback. And so we can actually just skip that and just go right into the function. And in this case, we're just going to do a console.log. Let's just say listening on port 3000, and that's it. That's a full-blown Express app. We're listening on a port, we're going to respond, and we're going to get a request, and that's it. Now, don't stop yet. There's a whole lot more to this, but that's the core of what an Express app really is. Now, let's pop over and run this so we can see what's happening. Now that we've got Express kind of set up, let's run it so we see what happens when we make our calls. Now here I've got my Express app, and if I'm in Visual Studio, I can actually just hit Control tilde and get my little terminal window all set up, which is kind of cool, and it's running right from this location. Now if you're not using Visual Studio Code, you can drop out to a console and run everything from there. And for the most part, I'm just going to stay in VS Code just because it's easier and lets you see everything all on one screen. Every once in a while, I may pop out to a terminal, but for the most part, I'm just going to leave everything right here. All right, now to run this, we're just going to type node app.js, and all that's going to do is execute whatever code is in this app.js file, and it's really all an Express application is, right? It's just a JavaScript file. It's got some commands for Express. And it's going to listen to some stuff, and it's just a JS file that gets run by Node. That's it. And so we're going to run node app.js to get this thing running. And you see, there's our listening on port 3000. Now, if we drop out to a browser, I'm going to use Chrome. We just come up here and say localhost 3000, and there we are. Hello from my app. It works. Everything's up. It's running. It's done. Now, there's a couple things I want to talk about though as we get through this. So this message here, listening on port 3000. We're logging out using console.log, and that's going to make some people feel icky, and it should, honestly. And so that's not really the right way to do it. So we're going to introduce something different, and we'll show you a couple of different options here. Let's take a minute and let's talk about some debugging choices we can make to keep track of what's going on in your application. And we'll do that now so we understand that part of the application before this blows up into a big monolithic thing. So what we're going to do now is look at debugging a little bit, just putting some error messages and debug messages in our code. Now I'm going to give you 3 packages that we're going to install and use to work through getting some debug information about our application and just paying attention to the types of things that are going on. The first thing we're going to do is break out of our application, and notice down here at the bottom we've got console.log here and listening on port 3000. So let's take a minute and install a package called Chalk. npm install Chalk, and there it is over in our package.json. Now if we go back over to our app up here at the top, we're going to do const chalk equals require chalk. And then if we come back down here and we run our application, node app.js, you see we've got this message listening on port 3000. And that's totally cool, it's helpful. But if we start spitting out a lot of messages, it's going to be hard to see that through the noise. And so what Chalk's going to do is allow us to set some colors on our messages so that we can group them together and just kind of notice what's going on through all the noise of all the messages. So let's take this 3000, and I'm just going to cut that like this. And we're going to add a plus chalk.green. And actually what's cool here in Visual Studio Code, I can hit chalk dot and you get to see all the color options that we have. But I'm going to use chalk.green and put 3000 back in there. We'll save that, close out the application, and start it again. Now you see, hey, we've got some colors going on. Now Chalk has this nice way of just popping out a little bit of color. So you can, if you've got an error, you can color it red. If you've got something working, you can color it green. It just kind of helps you see what's going on with your website. Now, one thing I want to talk about real quick, and we'll drop these in over the course of this course, since we're using a modern version of Node, we have access to all of the cool ES6 features. And so what we're going to do is instead of this plus stuff we've got going on here, we're going to use a template string. So we're going to take all this off at the end here, and we're just going to put template strings. Template strings are this little backtick, and that's above the tab key on the Mac. If you're on Windows, don't worry, it's in the same place. It's right above the tab key. And here we can just do listening on port, and then around Chalk, we just do this $ curly brace thing. And then we close the curly brace right there. Now we can save that, come back down here, Control C, start it up again, and there we've got the same thing. And so this is just a cool little way of embedding things in our strings that we'll use quite a bit, actually. But for right now, let's just say, hey, that's cool. We did template strings, and let's move on. Now, the next thing we're going to do is get rid of console.log altogether, which is super cool because we don't want to use console.log, right? I'm going to give you a better way. So we're going to use something called debug. So const debug equals require debug. And one feature debug, what's going to go right here is we're going to tell it where we are. So we're actually going to execute it, and we're going to pass in the file that we're in or the section of the code that we're in. So we're going to say we're in app, and we're going to save that. Now, real quick, we've got to jump back down here and do an npm install, and we're going to do npm install debug. So if we go back over to package.json, there's our debug right there. Okay, now one thing I haven't talked about, but we probably should talk about real quick, is if things are broken and we're way out of whack, you can just do an npm install and the specific version of whatever's in my package.json file here, and that will make sure that you're getting the right thing, so that in case you're having problems, you can make sure you're using the same thing I am. So if you need to do that, we'll drop another comment or somebody will comment, and for the most part, just kind of go with what you get, but check the comments and see if you're having problems and see what other people or I have said. Now that we've got debug installed, let's look at what that looks like. So let's come back over to app.js, and instead of console.log, we're going to type debug, and we're going to save this. Now, if we come down here and we run this again, node app.js, notice we get no message. The message went away, which may or may not be a good thing, but here's why. The cool difference from debug to console.log is that debug only runs when you're running in debug mode. So if you deploy something to production and you're using debug, it's not going to spit stuff out on the console. That's awesome, and that's honestly a huge plus. But the way you make it work, though, is you type debug equals star node app.js, and then you hit enter. Note that on Windows, you've got to do something different, right? You got to do set debug equals star ampersand node app.js. Look at all this stuff. Oh my goodness. Okay, none of this stuff was here before. That's because Express uses debug too. And you can see the cool part about this is look at the last message right down here, app listening on port 3000. The first word in all of these things is what we passed into debug when we loaded it. So here we said require debug app. App is listening on port 3000. Express application and Express router are also spitting things out, which is super cool, but this can actually get a bit wordy. So let's talk about how to fix that. You can come in here and just do debug equals app, and now you're just going to get messages for app. So debug is kind of cool because it's going to give us a lot of extra options when we do things. So let's do one more. We're going to do an npm install Morgan. And what Morgan's going to do for us is log some things to the console that have to do with our web traffic. So I don't have to write these out to the console on my own. We can just use Morgan to do it. And so we come back up here, Morgan equals require Morgan. Now, what we're about to do is something called middleware. And we haven't talked about middleware yet. And we don't talk about middleware actually for a couple of modules. So just bear with me. Just know that this is what we're doing. We're going to do app.use Morgan. And we're going to say combine. And I'll talk to you about what that means here in just a second, but just go with this. All right, now with that here, let's come down and let's start our application. Now, if we come out here, we go localhost 3000, you'll see hello from my library app. And then if we go back over to our terminal window, you see I have a get spit out to our page, right? There's a lot of information in there, which you probably don't care about. But that's Morgan giving us a whole bunch of information about our page. So let's fix this. We don't need that much information. So Morgan has a lot of settings, and we use combined, and that kind of gives me everything. But we can do tiny if we want less information. So we'll close this, restart it. Let's pull our page back up. We'll hit refresh, and now you see we've got our get and just the minimum information. So we served back r/route, and that's it. So that's debugging. That's getting information associated with our application. Now, if you want to dig in and you can set breakpoints, you can do all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to do that because that's going to be more specific to the application. But at the very least, this is going to give you all the information you need to work through and understand what's going on inside your application. The next thing we want to do in order to do an application, right, is we're going to spit out an index.html. So let's start figuring out how to render an HTML page as part of our Express app. All right, we're not building a web app unless we're actually serving some HTML. So let's take a minute and learn how to serve an index.html page for our web app. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're just going to create a index.html and just serve it the way it is. We're not adding anything custom to it yet. That'll be the next module, but let's at least get something started. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here, going to create a new folder called public. And this folder is where we'll store our HTML files. We'll store our JS and CSS from a couple modules from now. We'll put all of that stuff in this public folder. And then let's create a new file called index.html. And real quick, let's just throw a little bit of stuff in here and just say, welcome to my HTML page. Let's save that. All right, now I have to figure out how to actually serve this HTML file up to the browser. And the way we're going to do that is with something called static files. And so basically anything that's static content, anything that doesn't require Express to do any calculations or customizations or anything like that, we just want to send back to the browser as they exist. And so we're going to do that using another piece of middleware. We're going to come right down here under app.use Morgan, and we're just going to say app.use. And here we're actually going to have to use Express. Remember when I said don't short circuit the app, actually like const Express and then const app? Well, here's why, because we need Express as the actual Express package, .static. It's got a helper function on it that will set up some middleware to handle static files. So we just need to tell it where we're going to pull those static files from. What we want to use is a node package called path. And so const path equals require path. Now we don't have to npm install path. It just comes out of the box as part of node. And so we can just pull that right in. We're going to do path.join. And then what we're going to tell Express is where on the file system these static files are. And for us, we're going to use something called dir name. It's just a variable that comes bundled into node. It just says, where are you running from? So we're going to say dir name. And then we're also going to say, hey, from where we're running, we're going to go to public. So anything that comes in for just a index.html file, just a static file, we're going to go look in this public directory and send it. And if nothing that we're looking for matches what's in static, then we'll move on to line 12. So we're line 10, we're looking for static. On line 12, we're going to start processing things, right? So if anything matches what's in static, we just stop and we go. So, and you'll see that working here in a second. So let's reopen the terminal. We got to Control C, start it back up again. Now, when we go over to the browser and I hit refresh, we're going to stop saying hello from my app. And now we're going to see welcome to my HTML page. And the reason why we're seeing that is, like I said before, we're searching for just the index.html. And so when it gets to line 10, express.static public, it looks in public and says, hey, is there something in public that matches what we're looking for? Yes. Great. If there's nothing in public that matches, then we move on to line 12 and we'll send hello from my app. Actually, if I just come in here and say, and I rename index to index 2, save that and refresh, now you see hello from my app. And notice we didn't have to restart anything, right? It just reaches directly into public. It says there is no index. So now I'm going to move on to line 12 and send the right thing. Okay, so let's rename this back to index.html, refresh this page. Welcome to my HTML page. We've got HTML working. All right, let's take a minute. We'll summarize, and then we will start building out actual functionality into our application. All right, we have successfully served index.html from our Express application. Now, that's not a lot, but it is just a little bit. So let's take a quick look at what we talked about. So we set up Express. We've got Express installed. We've got Express configured. It's listening on port 3000. Like all of that stuff's done. And then we talked a little bit about running it. We talked about it with debug and logging and those types of things, using Morgan to get logging installed. And we worked through a bunch of the tooling that we needed in order to get Express running and giving us the information we need to understand how our application's working. We served up some HTML. That was the last part of what we did. We just served up a static HTML page using the static middleware on Express. And so that gave us our index.html. Now, honestly, we're going to need to serve up all kinds of static files. And so we set the stage for how we're going to do Bootstrap and jQuery and all these other things that we're going to have to pull in over the course of the course, because that public directory is now there. And so when we drop stuff in there, if we need to go pull something out like Bootstrap, we just drop it in that public directory and then we're done. All right, that's there. Let's take a minute and let's set up some tooling. There's a little bit of configuration we kind of want to do. We're having to type out debug equals app and all of those things. Let's stop doing all of that. Let's set up some tooling and some scripting so that our application is easier to use and easier to maintain as we kind of build it out. Now that we've got just a little bit of code written, honestly, a very little bit of code written, but we've got some code. We've got some code written. Let's take just a minute and set up some tooling that'll help us work through making our lives a little bit easier in dealing with our code. So the first thing we're going to talk about is this need for us to run our application typing debug equals app node app.js, and just communicating how we do that. It's weird. And so there's a built-in way to deal with how to start our application, how to do various things in our application, and that's using the npm scripts. Right now we're using npm to install dependencies, and that's one part of it, but now we're going to use npm to actually execute things. And so the idea is, when you go pull this code base down, you can just type npm start and run your application. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about. The second tool we're going to talk about is something called nodemon. Right now, every time we change some code, we've got to stop app, then restart the app, and just kind of work through. So we're going to implement a tool called nodemon that's going to monitor our application and do some automatic restarts and things like that. And then the last thing we're going to do as part of nodemon is to work through something called environmental variables. So basically right now, we are hard coding port 3000. That's something hard coded into our application. And realistically, you push something in production, you don't want to hard code those things. You want those variables to be fed from the environment. And so what we're going to do through the development process is we're going to use nodemon to manage environmental variables so we can pass those pieces into our application through nodemon. All right, let's go check out some npm scripts. Let's take just a minute and make it a little bit easier to start running our application using npm scripts. So if you recall from the last module, in order to run our application, we have to type debug equals app space node app.js. And so if somebody else pulls our code down, they've got to know debug equals app node app.js, and if they want to get more information, they've got to type something a little different. And there's just a lot of information just embedded in this one thought. And as your application grows and things get more complicated, the way you start an application may be different. And so what we want to be able to do is just, if we close out of this, we want to just be able to type npm start and have our application run. And that's the point of what we're about to start doing. So if we flip over to package.json, you actually even see right here, there's a whole section called script. So it's already wired up, it's all ready to go. And the only thing in here right now is test. And notice it doesn't actually do anything. It just says, hey, no test specified, and then throws an error with the exit 1. So what we want to do is inside this scripts window, we want to add something called start. And actually, if we delete start and you just kind of look at the prompter here in Visual Studio Code, you see all of these other normal options that you might put into some npm scripts. But for right now, we're just going to do start. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this debug app command that we're running, and we're just going to drop it in there. Now remember, if you're on Windows, it's different. It's set debug app node app.js. But if you're on the Mac, that's what we're going to do. So now that's all there is to it. So if we save this and then run our app, notice npm start, and then you actually get the little printout that says what you're running, debug app node app.js, and then your app is now up and running. That's all there is to it. Now, when you pull this code down, you just type npm start, and you're good to go. One thing I want to add here is, remember, we have other debug options. So let's do a debug. Let's create a new script called debug, copy the same command, but now we're just going to pass in star. So now if you run npm debug, then you'll get all of the error messages instead of just the one. Now, I say npm debug. When we run npm debug, it actually isn't going to work. It's going to throw an error, and there's a reason for that. The reason why it throws an error here is because other than start and test, everything else has to have a run in front of it. So here we just did npm start. Here we ran npm debug. It didn't work. And notice npm test, we get no test specified. npm start and npm test just work out of the box. Anything other than those two things, you have to put a run in front of it. So in order to do debug, we're going to type npm run debug. And now look at all of the messages that are being spit out by the debugger using this run. All right, with that, we've got two options to run our application. One has minimal logging, the other one has a lot more logging, but we still have one issue, right? Well, we have more than one, but the one we're going to tackle next is I still have to Control-C and rerun every time I change my code. So as we're writing code, every time we do something, we have to close the application and then start the application again. We're going to implement a tool called NodeMon that is going to help watch for changes and then auto restart the application every time we make a change and save it. The next tool we are going to implement is NodeMon. It's going to do quite a few things for us over the course of this course, but for right now, we're just going to use it to do restarts whenever we change our code. Now, with all these packages that we use, right, the first thing we have to do is close out of our application and do an npm install NodeMon. And if we come over to package.json, we scroll down on dependencies, we'll see it pop up right there, 2.0.7. NodeMon is going to be used to restart our application as we change it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here. Don't forget to add a comma because we're going to add a piece right here. NodeMon config. And over the course of the next couple of clips, we're going to add a whole bunch of stuff in here. Not a whole bunch, but we'll add a little bit into here. And this will grow. But for right now, we want to do two things. One, we're going to say restartable and then give it just, let's say RS. So this means if I type RS in the terminal, it's going to auto restart. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to set a delay. And this just says, hey, wait 2,500 milliseconds, 2.5 seconds before you do a restart, just to give us time to like save a couple of different things if we want to and that kind of stuff. So let's save that. Now, the only other piece in this is if we come up here to start, where we say debug app node app.js, now we just say NodeMon and let's save that. And that's all there is to it. And so now if I do npm start, we're up and running, right? And notice right here, NodeMon, to restart at any time, enter RS. And it's watching everything in the path for JS or JSON files to get changed. So if I just type RS here on the bottom, it's going to restart. Now, if I come over to my app and I scroll down and say, hey, let's listen to port 3000 and save that, there you go. Now we got our new changes. So NodeMon is listening, it's paying attention to what's going on, and then anytime it needs to, it's going to restart due to changes. Okay, notice though, 3000 is hard-coded, right? Listening to port 3000. Ideally, we wouldn't want to hard-code 3000 here, right? We want to pass 3000 in from an external source in order to make sure that wherever we deploy, we're listening to the right place. And so in this next clip, let's take a minute and build out some environmental variables inside NodeMon so that we're just pulling the port number out of the environment instead of hard-coding it. Let's take a minute to build out some environmental variables in our application so that we don't have to hard code the port number into app.js. Now, if we come back over to package.json and look down here at the bottom in our NodeMon config, this is where we set up the restartable and the delay and all of that for NodeMon. And there's another piece we can add right here called env. And what env is going to do is pass in an object that gives us some variables that are passed in to our Node app through the environment. So let's say, hey, we're going to pass in the port number and we're going to pass in port 4000, just so we know it's different, right? Right now we're running on 3000. We're going to set up our environment to be 4000 so we know whether or not we're pulling port out of the environment. So we'll save that. Let's come back over to app.js and we're going to scroll up here to the top and we're going to say const port equals process.env.port, just like that. And so process.env is just what's coming out of the environment. So everything that NodeMon dropped in, this will pull out. And then when you deploy this stuff to production, you can set the same environmental variables in the process, in the node process that's running. So we're going to say that, or just in case, we'll run on port 3000. So now if we scroll down, we're going to say, hey, we're listening on port and we're listening on port. And let's change this back to on port. All right, if we save, now let's look down here at the bottom and see what we got. It's going to restart, and notice it changed the 2 to on, listening on port, but it's still 3000. It didn't pull the new changes from NodeMon. And the reason why it didn't do that is if you're making changes to NodeMon itself, it's not going to auto restart those changes, right? Node is running in process. And so in order to pull new NodeMon config items out of that, you actually do have to close. So come down here, we'll Control-C, we'll run npm start again. Now you see we've got listening on port 4000. Excellent. That's NodeMon. So let's take a minute and summarize what we've done here, and then we'll jump over and we'll actually start building real web pages. Now in this module, we did just a couple of things. It wasn't very long, we didn't do a whole lot, but we did a couple of things that are going to make our lives a lot easier over the rest of this course. The first thing we did was we implemented npm scripts. We did 2 npm start scripts. We did one that's just npm start that just runs with app as the output. And the second thing we did was we did an npm run debug, which gives us kind of a more robust logging experience, a debug experience, so we can see everything that's going on in the application, just to see how a couple of things different work and kind of work through. Now there are more courses on npm on the Pluralsight library, and so if you want to dig more in there, feel free to check out one of those courses. The second thing we did was implement NodeMon, and NodeMon did 2 things for us in this module. The first thing NodeMon did was watch for changes and auto restart. Over the course of this course, that's going to be hugely helpful, so that we can just write some code, hit save, and NodeMon's going to automatically restart our application, so we don't have to worry about that. The second thing it did was create environmental variables. We used to be hard coding port to port 3000, but now we can pass an environmental variable that allows us to know what port we should be running on just from the environment. And the use case for environmental variables becomes very broad, right? You can pass in database connection strings, you can pass in what environment you're in, those types of things will rapidly grow that environmental variables config list over the course of the project. All right, we've got those pieces done. Let's go start actually building web pages using a templating engine. Now that we've got a little bit of code and some tooling written, let's move to actually building out our website. And the first thing we're going to do when we talk about building out our website is talk about building out the HTML portion of our page. So we're going to implement something called a templating engine in order to start building dynamic HTML into our application. All right, so what a templating engine is going to bring to the table is it's going to allow us to render an HTML page, but at the same time embedding data into that page to make it dynamic. And so we're going to look at one templating engine called EJS. There's several of them out there. There's Pug and a few others. EJS is going to be the one we're going to use for this project in this course. We're going to talk about getting that set up, getting that installed, and then we're going to pass data into that page with some variables on the render object on our Express application. And then once we have the basics of the templating engine worked out, we're actually going to implement an actual template. We're going to take a whole suite of code because it's easier to do that, right? We're not going to type a whole bunch of CSS and HTML and all that. We're just going to take something pre-built and implement that into our application and then use that as the basis for everything else we're going to do. So we'll work on how to set that up and use the CSS and JavaScript and HTML that comes as part of a template to embed that into our application. All right, let's get EJS installed to get this process going. And now it's time to start rendering HTML in our application. We've done static HTML. That's kind of the easy part. Now we're actually going to render HTML as part of the application. We're going to do it a little bit dynamically using a templating engine called EJS. So as always, the first thing we're going to do when we pull in something new is we're going to npm install EJS. And if we go to our package.json, like we always do, you're going to see EJS 3.1.6 right there in our package.json. All right, now in our app, we now need to tell our Express application that one, we're going to be using EJS, and two, where these templates are going to be that it's going to use to generate our HTML. So first things first, we're going to come over here and we're going to create a new folder called source. This is typically standard for where you're going to put most of the code inside your application. So we're just going to go there, and then we're going to right click on source, create a new folder called views. And this folder is where we're going to keep all the views associated with our application. Now we come back over here into our app.js, and we're going to go down one level, and we're going to do app. Now, we've done app. If I click off of this, we've done app.get, we've done app.use. App.get is what sends responses back for GET requests. App.use is middleware, and we're going to talk about that more in depth later. For now, we're going to do app.set. And what app.set does is allow us to set variables inside the context of our application. And right now, we're going to do views. And basically what we're doing with app is we're setting a variable called views, and we're telling it where our views are. Source views. That's where we're storing all of the views for our application. And then we need to tell Express what the view engine is that we're going to use. So we're going to do app.set view engine, and we're using EJS. All right, so now we've got our Express app looking in source views for templates associated with EJS. And that's what it's going to use to render our HTML. All right, so let's do this. Let's right click on views and create a new file. And we're going to call it index.ejs. Now in here, we're going to say HTML, we're going to give it a body, and we're going to give it an h1. We're going to keep this simple for right now. Welcome to. And then let's actually just give our page a title. And so we'll deal a little bit more with passing things in the next clip. But for right now, let's just do something simple. And so let's just say equals title. And this greater than, less than, percent thing lets the rendering engine know this is where we do dynamic code. So it's going to look inside this greater than, less than, percent and look for dynamic code. And then this equals right next to it says just return back the variable title, whatever the value is in that. So we're going to save that. Now we're going to come over back over to app.js. And now when we go to get slash, we're going to now render index. And that's going to render our index page. And we are going to pass into that an object that's title. Welcome to Globomantics. And this kind of gets us started. Over the course of the rest of this course, we're going to build a conference website from a company called Globomantics that you may have run into once or twice if you're watching other Pluralsight videos. It's one of the standard Pluralsight templates that we're going to use. And we're going to build a full-blown conference website as part of this course. And so this is the first step in that of creating an index page. Welcome to Globomantics. So let's save this. We're going to do our npm start, and we're going to run this. I'm going to tease you a little bit because if you've run this, now if you've run over to Chrome and you say localhost 4000, notice what you're getting. You're still getting welcome to my HTML page. We didn't get this cool new thing. There's a reason for that. See, look at this. Look how this works. On line 11, we have an app.use and our static content. Then on line 17 is where we're rendering our page. So line 16, app.get. We don't get there. If you remember what I told you before, I'm looking for index.html. And so it looks inside public, it sees index.html, and it gives me that. So let's delete this. We're gonna move that to trash. Now we'll come back over here. We'll refresh our page. And there you see, welcome to Globomantics. And that's because we did our title twice. We'll delete that, save that. And notice, see, I restarted down here, that restart. I refresh now. There you go. Welcome to Globomantics. Okay, we've got the first piece done. But realistically, in your application, you're going to have to pass more than a title, right? The whole point of the rest of this is we're going to pull a large amount of data out of a database or some other API, and then we're going to want to loop over that data as we pass it to our templating engine. So what we're going to do next is look at how we're going to loop over data and render it out to the screen. So now that we've got the basics of the template working, now let's work on how to pass in arrays of objects and loop over those to display them out to the screen. All right, so right down here on line 16, we've got our app.get and then 17 res.render, and we're passing in the title of Globomantics. Now, normally, when you're working with a dynamic web page, normally you'll pull an array of data out of a database or somewhere, and you want to display that on the screen as you go. And so let's just create an array of data. We'll just call it data, and it's going to be an array. And for right now, we're just going to call it A, B, and C. We're just going to pass 3 pieces of data into our index. All right, so if we come over to index.ejs, here we've got our welcome to title. Let's just create a list. And then we'll loop over data. And so remember, we do this open %, %close. And now everything that's inside of this is just JavaScript. So really, we're just going to go data, which is the thing we called it, .map. This will let us loop over that data. And we pass in a arrow function, so I is going to stand for item. And then what we want to do is actually just spit out whatever I is in this case. And so the way we do that, what we want right here is an li, an item. But we're inside the dynamic piece, right? We're inside this block. So we actually just close the block and then reopen the block on the other side. And now we're just going to spit out that li over and over again. Now we need to spit out the piece of data that I is. And so we're just going to do another dynamic block equals I, just like that. And so basically, we've got our data.map, which is going to execute this arrow function that passes I, and then it's going to spit out this line right here for every item that is I. And we'll save that. Now let's refresh. Now you see there's our 3 items, A, B, and C. Excellent. Okay, now we have all the building blocks in place. So the next thing we want to do is pull down a template that gives us a nice web page that we can embed things in. Because usually when I'm working on a project for a client or for a company I'm working at, usually there's already a template. Like somebody is the CSS and HTML and all this stuff's already there, and I'm just embedding my dynamic pieces into it. So that's the model we're going to follow for this, so you kind of know how to get all that situated in your project. So let's take a minute and get a template installed and get that working, and then we'll start embedding data from there. All right, let's get a template installed into our application that we'll use as the basis for our conference website that we're going to build out over the rest of this course. If you look in the course materials for this module, you'll notice an extra folder inside the code documents, right? There's a Global Mantics web pages bundle that's in there right next to the code. The code folder is where you'll find all the code for this course. The web pages bundle is just some index.html, some CSSs, some images, that kind of stuff. And what we're going to do is we are going to just drop this code into the public directory of our application. And there you go, we've got the CSS, the fonts, all of that stuff. And notice I've got an index.html again that just came with this bundle that I dropped. And so if we go to localhost 4000 and I refresh the page, now you're going to be serving this static website, this index.html right here, because we're using static. And all the CSS and the JS and all that, actually, if you look at what Morgan just gave us, you've got Bootstrap and jQuery and Globo, Logo White and bitmaps and all kinds of stuff that has been pulled out of the JS and the images and all of that in the static content that we have. But remember, we don't want to serve index out of static. We just went through all the trouble of getting EJS set up. So we want to use that. So let's take this index.html. We're going to copy all of it and we're going to cut it. We're going to go to our index.js and we're just going to paste over that. We'll save that real quick just for fun. Let's close that. It's still there, which means we're going to get a blank page. I'm going to delete index.html here. And now that index is gone. So all of the contents of it have now been moved to this index.js, which is a significant amount of HTML that we'll dig into in the next module. Now, when I refresh the page, now we're pulling this dynamically out of our EJS templating engine. So now we're here and we've spent 5 modules just setting the underpinnings of our application. And now, starting in the next module, let's actually build a website and do dynamic pages. And we're going to pull conference sessions out of a database. And we're just going to do all kinds of stuff and really go and get this thing going. We wanted to take the time to set the stage with all of these pieces. We've got all of these pieces like the debug logs and the auto restarts and all of that stuff is important. And we wanted to make sure you walk through and got all that done. But now it's time to get down to business. Real quick, let's recap what we did here and then we'll jump over to the new stuff. All right, we're getting closer. We finally have something that looks like a web page. It's not dynamic yet, but we've got all the pieces in place to make it dynamic. And so that's one more step along the way. We started by talking about templating engine. So we're using EJS for this. And so we stripped everything away. It's a very simple EJS page that we passed things into and then generated an HTML page out of EJS that displayed that data. So that's the starting point. Now we've pulled in a template. We pulled in this Global Mantics HTML and JavaScript and CSS, just all the stuff that we don't really care enough about to want to type it all. So we're just going to pull that in and we're going to merge these two things together in the next module, right? We've got our template engine, our EJS, our dynamic part of the page, and we've got our HTML and our JavaScript and our CSS, the static parts of the page. And in this next module, we're going to merge those things together and start implementing routing to build multiple pages as part of this course. And so we'll have a sessions page, and then we'll have an individual session page, and we'll use the template we have and EJS to bring all that stuff together and start displaying dynamic data to our site. So we're working our way through building out a web application. And in this module, we're going to start talking about routing. And we're going to build out some routes for our application. Now, we've come pretty far in our journey to build out a web application. We've got some tooling set up. We've got basics of a web page showing. We've imported a template that gave us a nice looking web page to get started with. And in this module, we're going to start building out routes. We're going to have a session route, and then we'll have a single session route, and we'll work through all of that. Now, we're going to be generating some code as we do this. And so we're going to start talking about how to separate our code out into separate files. Right now, everything's in one file in app.js. So we're going to talk about how to pull that apart so we have multiple files as we go. We're going to add some parameter variables to our search. Like when we build out the single session route, I want to pass a session ID. So how do we do that in our routes? All right, the first step in this journey is to set up some navigation. So we have some links that the users can click on to get to these new pages we're going to create. Now, the first thing we have to do in order to build out our web application is actually implement a little bit of navigation so you have links to click on in order to get to the web page we're going to. So what we've got right now is this Global Mantics conference website. And the first thing we want to do is create a navigation item for sessions. Because ultimately, in order to get people to sign up to come to our conference, we need to display a list of sessions on this web page. And so what we're going to do is we're going to replace this brands link right here. We don't want that anymore. We're going to replace that with sessions. And so if we do a Control F or Command F, depending on where you are, and we look for brand, there's the first brand. That's a class. And then here's brands. We're just going to say this is now sessions. And we're going to get rid of this and say sessions. Now, there's actually 2 nav items here. One is that's expanded and one where the nav is contracted. So you got to change them both. We'll save that. Let's come back over to our browser. There you go. Now we have sessions. And if I click on sessions, I get nothing. Cannot get sessions. And there's a reason for that. We haven't implemented the sessions link yet. And so normally, if you just go with what you've learned so far, we'll come over here to app, we'll scroll down, and we'll just do an app.get. And we'll say, hey, app.get/sessions. And then we'll build out everything from here. But then, remember I said we're going to do a single session. So now you've got to do an app.getSessions slash, and then the session ID. So this starts to get unwieldy very fast. And so what we actually want to do now is we want to encapsulate this code. And instead of saying, hey, app.getSessions, we're going to implement a piece of middleware, app.use, and just say, hey, everything that goes to sessions, I want to implement this thing called a session router. And this session router is going to hold all of the code necessary to deal with a sessions route. So let's, in this next clip, look at what it takes to build something called a router, what that is, and how you use that in your application. All right, what we want to do now is build a thing called a router that's going to encapsulate all of the code necessary to handle a specific route. So in this case, we're going to build a router for /sessions and everything that falls underneath that. All right, so right here, we have app.use/sessions. And so we want to build a session router that handles all the routing necessary for everything that falls under sessions. So it's going to handle everything that goes to sessions. It's going to handle everything that goes to session / a session ID. It'll just deal with all of that. And so the first step in this process is to come up here and say const session router equals express.router. And we execute that. And so what this does is Express hands us this bundle of code called a router, and then we just leverage that sessions router in order to build all of our code. And so if we come back down here, let's write our router code. We're going to write it right here for right now, so you can see it all together. And then shortly, we'll pull all this code out to a separate file so that it makes sense as to why you would kind of break things up this way. And so we're going to say session router.route. Now, what we want to do is we want to handle the route/sessions. But right down here on line 19, notice the application is already saying, hey, if we're in /sessions, let's use session router to do that. So from session router's perspective, we're just handling the /route. And then we're going to say, hey, session router, when you do a get, when you get a get, as opposed to, we can also do, we can do a post, or you can do a put, or you can do a delete, all of those, we're going to do session router.get. When that happens, we're going to say rec and res, and we're going to say res.send, hello, session. But then we can go on to say, hey, guess what? Session router.route. And anytime you get something with an ID behind it, we'll talk about parameter values here in just a minute, but anytime you get something with an ID behind it, let's add a .get, rec and res, and we'll do a res.send, hello, single session. Let's save that. So let's go over to our browser. We'll refresh this page, and it blows up. From time to time, we're going to let some of this stuff sit here just so we can work through what's happening and what's broken, and so you can see. So here we said constant sessions router, and then we worked with sessions router, and we worked with sessions router. But look down here at my error. It says session router is not defined. And the reason for that is because I pluralized my link, and we're sending it to sessions, but then down here in app.use, we said /sessions, right? We said session router. So let's change that to sessions router. We'll save. And now watch NodeMon, when we fix that, it's going to auto restart after 2 seconds. And there you go. Now if we come back over and we refresh, now we get hello sessions. And I say sessions 1, hello single session. And the reason we do this is now all of this code is encapsulated inside the sessions router, and I can actually pull all of that code out. Because when we're handling a real session, right, there's a lot more code than this. There's actually quite a bit more code. So we can pull all of that out into a separate file that's called the sessionsrouter.js, and then just pull in the one line into app.js. So that's kind of why we want to start encapsulating it. So now that we've got the router ready, now let's actually start rendering this page of sessions with a whole bunch of session data. All right, now that we've got the route working, let's work on building out a page that will render this session data. If we go back and we look at our website, and we go back to the root route, right down here, there's this list of sessions: Dark Energy, Robotics, Strangers Rise. And so I want to use kind of this template to build out the rest of the sessions page. So let's actually just copy and then paste the index and name it sessions.ejs. And then in sessions.ejs, we'll leave the header the same. But then this part that says the future was 5 minutes ago, if we go back, like this whole section can go away. So if we get rid of the banner section, just delete all that. Now what we're going to end up with is this list of sessions. And so what we want to do is come back over to our app.js and do a res.render to render the page like we talked about in the last module. And then we're going to render sessions. So it's going to look for the sessions.ejs page. But then what we're going to do is we're going to pass in our object. And we're going to pass in an array of sessions. And for right now, let's keep this super simple. Let's just create an array of objects with a title and a description. And let's just call the title session 1 and the description of this is session 1. And then we'll replicate this a couple times. We'll change everything to 2, 3, and 4. Save that. Okay, so now when we render sessions, we are passing an object in that has sessions data in it. And so if we go back to our sessions.ejs page, let's only take this first one. Let's get rid of everything else. And this first section right here, we're going to replicate this for every time we see something in session. So if you remember from the previous module, we do our code in these little blocks right here. And so we're going to do sessions.map. And then we're going to pass in the session and then do something with it. And then we'll copy all of that other code in here. So let's do that. Okay, so let's take this section here, pull that up, and paste this in. All right, now instead of Dark Energy, where it says Dark Energy here, we want to instead say, give me session.title. Remember over here in app, we had a title and a description? So the title is there, and then session.description. And then let's get rid of the image and just leave the learn more. And we're going to use the learn more to link out to the other one. So let's save that. We'll jump over to app.js. Everything's good. Let's go to our website. We'll click on sessions. And now you see there's session 1, 2, 3, and 4. Actually, we've got an extra dangly. Get rid of that. Refresh our page. There you go. Session 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's a great start. Now we're looping over sessions. Let's take just a minute and actually pull some real data. Well, demo real data, and drop that on the page so it starts to look like something that is real. All right, now that we've got the route working, let's work on building out a page that will render this session data. if we go back and we look at our website, and we go back to the root route, right down here, there's this list of sessions: Dark Energy, Robotics, Strangers Rise. And so I want to use kind of this template to build out the rest of the sessions page. So let's actually just copy and then paste the index and name it sessions.ejs. And then in sessions.ejs, we'll leave the header the same. But then this part that says the future was 5 minutes ago, if we go back, like this whole section can go away. So if we get rid of the banner section, just delete all that. Now what we're going to end up with is this list of sessions. And so what we want to do is come back over to our app.js and do a res.render to render the page like we talked about in the last module. And then we're going to render sessions. So it's going to look for the sessions.ejs page. But then what we're going to do is we're going to pass in our object. And we're going to pass in an array of sessions. And for right now, let's keep this super simple. Let's just create an array of objects with a title and a description. And let's just call the title session 1 and the description of this is session 1. And then we'll replicate this a couple times. We'll change everything to 2, 3, and 4. Save that. Okay, so now when we render sessions, we are passing an object in that has sessions data in it. And so if we go back to our sessions.ejs page, let's only take this first one. Let's get rid of everything else. And this first section right here, we're going to replicate this for every time we see something in session. So if you remember from the previous module, we do our code in these little blocks right here. And so we're going to do sessions.map. And then we're going to pass in the session and then do something with it. And then we'll copy all of that other code in here. So let's do that. Okay, so let's take this section here, pull that up, and paste this in. All right, now instead of Dark Energy, where it says Dark Energy here, we want to instead say, give me session.title. Remember over here in app, we had a title and a description. So the title is there, and then session.description. And then let's get rid of the image and just leave the learn more. And we're going to use the learn more to link up to the others. Let's save that. We'll jump over to app.js. Everything's good. Let's go to our website. We'll click on sessions. And now you see there's session 1, 2, 3, and 4. Actually, we've got an extra dangly. Get rid of that. Refresh our page. There you go. Session 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's a great start. Now we're looping over sessions. Let's take just a minute and actually pull some real data. Well, demo real data, and drop that on the page so it starts to look like something that is real. All right, let's take a minute and implement some real looking data to see how this would look with a little bit more real random data to it. So if you look in the source materials for this module, you'll notice we still have that Global Mantics web pages, the template there. We've got the code folder, which is where all the finished code is for this project. And then you've got this sessions.json. And this sessions.json, if we just kind of drag it over here and look at it, you'll see it's just session. It's got a title, a description, when it starts and ends, the speakers associated with it, all of that stuff is embedded in here. And so we're going to use this to kind of build out that web page and then more information on the single page. And so what we actually want to do, we're going to right click on source. We're going to create a new folder called data. And then let's put this sessions in our data directory. Okay, excellent. So if we come back over to app.js, let's scroll up to the top and say const data equals require source data sessions.json. And actually, instead of calling it data, let's actually just call it sessions. Save that. Okay, so if we come back down here, instead of this list of sessions, we can actually just get rid of all of that and save and pass sessions in on this object. And so now, when we're looping over sessions.map, we're going to be pulling all of the sessions out of this sessions.json folder that we're pulling in up here. So let's go over to our website, refresh this page, and now look at all of that. Now those descriptions are long. That's not going to work because it kind of throws everything off. So let's actually do this. Let's come back over to sessions.ejs. And look here, we do sessions.description. But really, let's say in this case, I only want the first few hundred characters. Let's just say 300. I can still, this is just JavaScript, right? So I'm outputting session.description, but I could actually do .slice and say, give me from 0 to 300. Save that, refresh this page, and now everything's kind of lined up. And so what we're going to do now is talk about, see this learn more? Let's add here an index. So we want to go to /sessions/index, right? Because I want more. I want the full description. I want the speaker. I want the start and end times. I want all of that information embedded on this page when I click learn more. And so right now we're going to pass the index. Later we'll do the ID when we're talking about databases, but for right now, we can pull index in from the map function and just use that. And so when I come back over here and I refresh my page, let's look at what this looks like. It says could not find a closing tag. Well, the reason is because we didn't create the closing tag right there. Refresh. And now when you hover over learn more, notice session 0, sessions 1, sessions 2. When I click on this, I want to see the details for that session. So let's do that. Let's create a route for that single item and display the details for that item. Let's take a look at what it looks like to implement a single item route or how to pass parameters into our routes. All right, so if we come back over to our code in app.js, here we're handling our sessions router.route for the slash. But then down here, we want to be handling the route to a given ID. Right now, we just hard-coded the 1, but this is the way you do a parameter. So if I do :ID, right here, basically what it's saying is if you pass anything to /sessions/something, so /0, /1, /GUID, whatever slash, that item that comes after sessions is going to be passed into this router function. So let's pull that out. So we're going to say const ID equals rec.params.id. And now I have access to that ID that was passed in on params. And let's add that right here. Let's just say hello from single session and then the ID and save that. So after 2 seconds, we restart. Let's go to our website and say, hey, here's session 0. Hello from single session 0. If I put, a whole bunch of stuff right here and hit enter, I'm going to get hello from single session, whatever is there. So now if I go back to my page and I go down to Fearless Git and I click learn more, hello for single session 7. Now, I don't want to see hello for single session 7, right? What I want to see is the details for single session 7. So let's build a new page for rendering that single item that's being passed in. All right, let's take a minute and build out a new little page that we can use to render just this single item. All right, so if we come over here into our views, let's create a new file called session.ejs. We're going to keep this one pretty simple. HTML, body. Okay, we're going to pass into this EJS page a session. So we'll have session.title. We go back over to our sessions.json, right? It's got a title, a description, and let's pull in the first speaker. So title, description, and speakers is an array. We'll just pull in the first one. So session.title session.description, and then before the description, let's pull in the session.speakers.0.name. All right, save that. So what we're expecting coming into sessions.ejs is this little session object with all this information on it. So if we come back over to app.js and we look at this, right now we're doing a res.send for the single session. Let's change this to a render. We're rendering session, and then we have to pass something in. And up above, we're passing in this object with sessions on it. Right? We're pulling the sessions from external source. We're going to send a session from sessions sub ID. We're going to save that. We go back to our page and we hit enter here. Now we get just our little page, Fearless Git by Michelle Jenkins, and there's the description. So if I go back to the sessions page and I go to automation, there we go, by Brandy Terry, there's the description. So we are now rendering that specific individual item as we go. Now let's go back and look at our app.js code for a second. So now we're starting to get more code, right? Our sessions router has a route for just slash, it's got a route for slash ID. We're starting to put a whole lot of code in here. Let's look at what it takes to pull all that code out into a separate router file and then just pull it in so it's one line instead of a whole bunch of lines. All right, let's look at pulling all of this router code out of app.js into its own file. All right, so if we scroll down in app.js to this sessions router, right, there's a whole chunk of code here that's just sitting in app.js that really doesn't need to be. So we're going to right click on source and create a new folder, and we're going to create a routers folder that's going to hold all of the routers information. We're going to create a new file called sessionsrouter.js. And what we're going to do is we're going to come back over here and we're going to pull this code, pull it right out, and paste it right there. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff that this needs, right? I mean, we can't just copy this code. We've got to create sessions router right here. This line of code right here has to come over where we're creating our sessions router. Now, we need Express, right? We need Express.router, so let's pull that over. Const Express equals require Express. And so basically what we're doing here is we're just pulling Express just like we were over in app.js. We're creating sessions router, doing all of our routing, and then we need to export sessions router. All right, now we need the sessions data, right? That data is being used here in the router. It's not being used over in app.js. So let's actually find this line of code. We're going to pull that out of there. So we can pull all of this data manipulation code out of app.js as well. And we're going to drop it right there. It's no longer in source.source because we're in source. So it's going to go ... data sessions.js. That's the right place. We're going to save that. Now over in app.js, now we're no longer needing to pull sessions router from express.router, right? Now we're pulling sessions router from require./source/routers/sessions router. We'll save that. We'll refresh the page. So we have pulled all of that router information out of our app.js and we've dropped it over here on the sessions page. Let's see if that worked for us. Let's just open our page back up and refresh. And everything works. It all is just exactly the same as it was before. You click on learn more, you still get the more, everything's still good. So now it's just a little cleaner, a little tidier, and that's all there was to it, to pull that information out. Now we've pulled our data manipulation code out. We're not pulling data anymore. So when we go and look at databases in the next module, all that database code is going to be over in sessions router. It's not going to be here in app. Let's take a minute and summarize this module, and then we will jump into databases. A little over halfway done with our journey to build a web application with Node.js and Express. And in this module, we built out routes for our application. We started with just index, right? And then in this module, we built sessions. We built an individual sessions page. We kind of built out all the functionality around a set of routes for sessions. We then took all of that code and we dropped it out into a separate file. So now we've tidied up our routes so that those routes exist somewhere else instead of all of our code just being in app.js. We also talked a little bit about parameter variables, right? We talked about how when we add a :id on the end of a route, that's going to be passed into our code on the request with rec.params.id. Now, we've wired up some data that's just kind of hard-coded in our app. Let's start wiring this thing up to a database. So up until now, we've been dealing with static data that's just coming out of a file in our source code. Let's install a database and start pulling things dynamically out of a database. That's more real as to how applications really work, right? We've come a long way, actually, since the last module on building a web application, right? We've got tooling set up, we've got some pages, we've got multiple pages going on. We're certainly getting there. And what we're going to do in this module is we're going to start using MongoDB for our backend database. And this is going to work through several different topics and ideas kind of as we go. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this JSON file that we have with all of our session data, and we're going to use that to insert data into the database. So we're going to create another set of routes, the admin routes, and we're going to create a page that just drops data into our database. And then we're going to work through the process of querying data. So instead of pulling data directly out of that JSON file, when we go to /sessions, we're going to go to the database and pull that data out. And then when you go to the individual ID for a specific item, we're going to go back to the database and pull that individual specific item. Now, the first step in this whole process is setting up MongoDB. Now, we're going to use a cloud version of MongoDB because that's going to keep things really simple and easy, and we don't have to worry about different machines running in different ways and all that. We're just going to keep it encapsulated up into the cloud when we get this set up. Address that we have, we're going to add that IP, and we're going to create our user. We're just going to auto-generate a secure password, and we're going to save this, and then create that user. And then we're going to connect our application using Node.js, and here is the username and password that we're going to use when we start building out our application. So we're going to save that too. All right, the last thing we're going to do is click on collections. Note, there's no data here, right? We can load a sample data set, but I'm going to do that on our own in the next clip as we go. So what we've done is created an Atlas MongoDB instance in AWS that we're going to use to interact with our database. It's just easier than trying to get things installed locally. What the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create some admin routes in our application that's going to allow us to interact with MongoDB and take this data we already have and drop it up into the cloud. All right, now that we have an instance of MongoDB created, up in the cloud, ready to go, let's create an admin route in our application that we're going to use to insert session data from this JSON file that we already have up into the cloud. I'm going to do a couple of things with this. One, you'll learn how to build a new router instead of just sessions router. We're going to add another one, so then we'll have to add multiple. We're going to go ahead and cover the inserts. So Mongo inserts are going to be covered here. And so we're going to do a couple of different things with this piece, just so you can learn some key skills. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come into routers here, and we're going to create a new file called adminrouter.js. And of course, you're going to need const express equals require express, because in order to create our admin router, we need express, right? So const admin router equals express dot router. And then down here, we need to do a module.exports equals admin router. There you go. So that's the core pieces, like that's the little pieces of it. We're going to do a couple more things. So over here in app, we didn't do this on the last one, but we're going to do it on this one. Remember we required debug? It said app. Well, now let's do that again, but this time say app : admin router. So now we can use debug in here to kind of debug the Mongo information and include it in admin router. Okay, the next thing we need to do is pull in MongoDB. So const MongoDB equals require MongoDB. Same thing we always have to do when we start pulling something new in. Let's Control-C down here, npm install MongoDB. And if we go to package.json, scroll down, there it is, MongoDB 3.6.6. All right, we've got our Mongo installed. We've got our admin router there. All that's there. Excellent. So now we want to create our root. So admin router.route. We're just going to go with the slash and go ahead and do our .get. So our .get, if you recall, right, rec and res, and this will be where our function code goes. All right, so in order to use Mongo, really all we want is Mongo client. So in order to connect, right, it's going to be MongoDB.Mongo client, and we're going to use Mongo client for about everything we need to do. So what we can do is destructure this. So up here, we were doing const MongoDB equals require MongoDB. We can actually just do that and just pull the Mongo client piece out of MongoDB and use that directly. Okay, now there's two pieces of information we need. First and foremost, we need the URL to our Mongo database. So remember I said we were going to save that information, and I did. I'm going to paste that in right there, and then the password. Now I am leaving this password clear text because by the time you're watching this database won't exist anymore. So don't worry about it. It'll be just fine. And instead of my first database, let's just get rid of that, just like that, and save that. Because what we're going to do down here is add the DB name. So what do we want to call our database? Well, our database is going to serve all of Globomantics. So let's actually just call our database Globomantics. And these are the pieces of information we're going to use to drive our application. When we work with MongoDB, we can do one of three things. We can do callbacks. Callbacks is fine. Callbacks is old school. That's been something we've been doing for a long time. We can do promises. That's another option we could use. That's been around for a long time. But what we're going to do in this course is we're going to use async await. Because async await allows for a little bit more easy to read experience, and I want you to understand what's going on as you work through this, so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to open up async function Mongo, and then execute it. So basically what's happening is we're just creating a little environment right here in our code that's going to allow us to run Mongo in kind of an async await fashion. So everything from here is just going to execute in line as we go. So the first thing we're going to do is say let client. We're just creating a client because we want to create the client out here, because we're going to create a try catch block, just like that. And in the catch, we're going to debug error.stack. Just give me the whole error right out. So if something breaks, we're going to try it right in there, or we're going to know right in there. Okay. So the first thing we need to do inside here is we're going to open our client. So we're going to do client equals await Mongo client.connect to the URL. And we don't need to do a promise on this. We don't need to, because we're using await. So client, it's just going to sit there and it's going to wait for Mongo client to connect to the URL. Then let's do a debug statement just so we know what's going on. Connected to the MongoDB. Then we're going to create an instance of our Mongo database. Const db equals client. So this client that we just got back from Mongo client, the connection dot db name. So that is now giving us a database. So that database, that Globomantics database, doesn't exist yet. And that's one of the cool things about Mongo, right? It'll self-create when we're ready to go and ready to start dropping data in. Now what we want to do now is add data. Now we don't have the data yet. So let's pop back over to our session router and just pull the sessions data that we had in session router. So const sessions equals require data sessions. Let's drop that in our admin router as well, because this sessions data is the data we want to create up in our Mongo database. All right, so let's do that. So const response equals await db dot, so our database that we've just created, dot collection, and we're creating a collection called session dot. We're going to do an insert many sessions, and then we're going to do a res dot. Okay, so here's the reality. So far in our course, we've done a res.send that just sent back strings. Like we use that to just send pieces of information back. We've done a res.render, which rendered index or session or sessions. It ran it through the templating engine and rendered a page. Now we're going to do res.json, and we're just going to send back the response back to the browser page that's getting it. And honestly, that's it. That's all there is to this. It's actually just that easy to get this up and running. So we're going to save this, and then we're going to go over to app.js and wire this admin router up. So if we come back over to app.js and we scroll down to where we do sessions router, now we're going to do admin router. And then where we're doing app.use sessions, we're going to add app.use admin router. Now let's fire up our application and then try running this and get this to work by inserting those sessions up into our MongoDB instance. All right, now that we got all that code written to insert sessions into a database, let's actually execute this new route we've created and see what happens. So here we are in our admin router. Everything's up and running and ready to go. So let's go to localhost 4000/admin and run this. And look, we got a result back. And then in OPS, we got our speakers back. And so if we come back over to our cloud database instance and we refresh this page, you'll notice now we have a database called Globomantics and session data with 200 documents in it that's full of all of our session information. So now that we've got that, let's modify the rest of our application to query from the database and load our sessions list dynamically from Mongo. We'll work through the process of just doing a general select out of MongoDB to display it up to the screen. All right, let's start the process of pulling sessions out of the database to display them to the screen. So if we come back over to our session router, this is everything that we have in here, but notice our sessions is coming from this data directory, and we want to modify that to start coming out of MongoDB. So if we come over to our admin router where we just built all this Mongo client code, let's find just the one session that we're looking for. All right, let's replicate the same thing we just did on the single session route and go see how that looks. So if we go back over to our sessions router, let's just replicate everything we have here. So we'll just copy all of that and then paste. Let's keep the ID where we're pulling the ID. And then here where we're rendering, we're going to change that here in just a second. Okay, so we're connecting to Mongo. We're pulling our database and then our collection for sessions. Now we want to, instead of find to array, we're going to use find one. And what we need to do with find one is actually find it by that underscore ID, right? So if we go back to Mongo, this object ID right here, that's the thing that we want to search by. And so what we're going to do is we're going to search by underscore ID. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this won't work because ID from us is a string. Like up here where we're passing in rect.params ID, that's coming in as a string, and that's great. However, out here on MongoDB, notice it's an object ID. It's not really a string, it's more of an object ID. And so what we need to do is actually create a new object ID out of ID and search for that. Now, where do we pull object ID from? Let's scroll back up to the top and just add that to the list of things we're pulling out of MongoDB and save. Now we have restarted and we should be good to go. That should be all there is to this. If we come back out and we hit enter here, it still isn't working. And let's look at why. We're sending back something undefined. And so let's do a little debugging to figure out what's going on here. So the issue right here is that we're still pulling back sessions, and then down here we're looking for the session ID. Remember I said we'd go back and fix that? Well, we didn't do it yet. So now we have to. So let's change this to session and then just send back the session. Watch for that to restart. Come back over here and refresh. Now we're getting our single session back. And so if we go back to Globomantics and let's look at AI-powered robots, there's AI-powered robots. Just like that. It works. And that's all there was to it. Now that we've got our database working, we've got sessions being pulled back from the database, we've got individual sessions being pulled back from the database. Let's summarize this module real quick, and then we're going to start talking about authorization and authentication. All right, we are getting closer and closer to the end of building a web application with Node.js and Express. And in this module, we talked about using MongoDB. Now, there's a lot of databases you can use. And so for the purposes of this conversation, we're using MongoDB. But if you look through the course library, you'll find other databases you can connect to and use, and you'll find something that might help you if your database of choice is something other than MongoDB. But for right now, we really wanted to focus more on the idea of connecting to a database and pulling some data back. And we did two sides to this, right? We inserted a bunch of data, and we did that under the guise of working with this data file that we had already in our data directory, and then just creating a quick route that was going to take that data and insert it wholesale up into MongoDB. So we learned how to do the insert many on our Mongo client to make that happen. Then we talked about querying data, and we queried data in two ways. The first way we did it was with find, and then the second way we did it was with find one. And with find one, then we were looking for an ID, and we specifically needed to look for an object ID. So we talked a little bit about what that looked like. Okay, now that we have both types of querying done and the inserting done, let's spend a little bit of time talking about how to secure our application with some authorization, some authentication using Passport.js. In this module, we're going to talk about authentication and creating users for our web application. Now, we've come quite a long way in this course on building a web app with Node.js and Express. And we've got databases set up, we've got routing done, we're pulling stuff out of the database, displaying it to the screen, all of that's there. But there's an important thing that we're missing that most applications that you might be working on will require, and that's the concept of a user. So in this module, we're going to start creating users. We're going to create a new login, the password, you can sign up, you can sign in, all of those types of things. We're going to do some authentication. That's where you enter username and password, and we just validate that you are who you say you are, and we'll log you in appropriately. Then we're going to do authorization, which is whether or not you have access to certain parts of the website. And so we're actually going to lock you out of everything. You can't get to sessions, you can't get to profile page, you can't get to any of that if you're not signed in using our authorization scheme. And we're going to do that with Passport. So Passport is pretty much the default NPM package for Express for user management. Now, we're mostly going to do it all using a local strategy. So we're just going to do logins and passwords locally to our application. But if you eventually want to do things like Google and Facebook and LinkedIn, the social logins, that stuff will all be handled by Passport as well. All right, we can't do much until we've got users created. So the first thing we're going to do is implement a sign up page. Now, the first step in creating users, right, is actually letting somebody sign up. So the first thing we're going to do is find a place that's a little easy to work with where we can create a sign up form. And so that's the first thing we're going to do right now. And if you look at our webpage, where we've got it right now, we've got our sessions tab right here that we can click on and we can go to. But on this home page, we have this big sign up today button. And so what if, for right now, we just create a form right here on this page that we can use to sign up a new user? Instead of going and creating a whole new page, let's just repurpose this page to allow that behavior. So if we come over to our website and we go to index.ejs and we just do a search for sign up today, somewhere in this area, we just have this div. And so what I want to do real quick is just right here in this div, we're going to keep this very simple. I don't want to make it complicated and get distracted from what we're trying to do. So we're going to keep the code very simple here just to get this form created. So we're going to create a form with the name of sign up. And we are going to post to auth sign up. So an auth route sign up is the page, and we're going to post. We need two inputs. We need a username and a password. All right, and then let's just repurpose this button down here. Let's just X that, paste it here. We're going to actually just turn it into an input, type a submit, and we're going to save this. Now, there's one more thing we want to do. I just kind of want to show you why real quick. If we come back over to our website and we refresh, now we have one, submit and sign up today. We want to fix that, but also our username, when we type in here, you don't even notice I'm typing in here, right? Because it's white. So we got to fix that, and we got to fix our sign up today. So let's pull that out there. And then up here, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to implement a style. It's white because it's carried over from the template that we're using. And we're just going to say color black. We'll do it on both sides. So let's save that. All right, let's refresh our page. Now we got sign up today, a username and a password. And normally you would have, a type of password right here. Type. There we go. All right, so I have a form. I've got a username and a password I can enter. Normally for a sign up form, you'd have a little name, email address, all those kinds of things. So we're going to keep this compact and simple for right now. And I'm going to click sign up today. And when I click sign up today, I'm going to post to auth sign up. Now I don't have auth sign up. Auth sign up doesn't exist. But we've got our form created that lets us create a new user. So the next thing we need to do is get those auth routes created that allow us to log in or sign up. All right, now that we've got the form created that's going to allow us to create a user, now we need to create a route that's going to manage that process for us. So if we come back out to our application and we look up in our routers, right now we've got an admin router and a sessions router. What we need to add now is a new file called auth router. And that's what we're going to use to manage all of our sign up and sign in and those processes. So if we look at session router, and we scroll to the top, there's these three calls, Express, Debug, and Mongo Client. We're going to need all three of those. So let's copy that, come back to our auth router and drop them in there. Now the same process we followed before, if we look back at session router, we have to do const session router, express router, and then we have to export it. So we're going to do const auth router equals express.router. And then down here, we're going to do module.exports equals auth router. Excellent. All right, so here in the middle is where we do the work, right? So we're going to say auth router.route. And now we have to know what route we're going to use. If we come over to our browser, notice auth sign up. So the router is going to be placed at /auth. And so we just needed to say, hey, at /signup.host. Now here's the important thing, right? Everything we've done up till now, if you go back to sessions router, everything we've done up till now is a .get. What we're going to do now is handle a post. We haven't done that yet. We haven't posted data. And so all this means the organization of the route is the same. It's just we can apply different verbs. And so now we're taking a post, so we're going to do a .post. And so when the browser sends a post message to /auth/signup, we're going to handle it with this function. So it's the same, rec and res. And then inside rec and res, what we really want is to get access to the body, to the piece of information that's there. If we go back to the sessions router, if we scroll down to where we were taking the param, if we were doing parameters, so we were going to /sessions/an ID, we have this little colon ID, and that colon ID is pulled out and dropped onto our request object, onto the params with an ID. Well, that's not going to work for the body, right? Because now we're posting something inside the body, and that's going to be handled differently. And so what we're going to end up with is we're just do a response.json. We're going to send back whatever we get, rec.body. We're going to get something on the body, but we don't know what that is yet. So let's save that. Let's go back over to app, and we'll talk about how to manage the body parser. First things first, before we manage the body parser, let's pull this in. So const auth router equals require source routers auth router. Okay, and so under app.use is where we're going to set this up. Now it used to be that we had this package called body parser, and if you played with this at all before, body parser was the thing that would pull that in. Well, with Express 4.16, right now we are using in package.json 4.17.1. In 4.16, body parser became natively supported, so we don't need to worry about that anymore. So we can just do app.use express.json. That used to be body parser.json. Now it's just express.json. And then app.use express.url encoded extended false. Don't worry about what that means or why. Treat that as kind of just boilerplate code for right now. But what this is going to do is we now have this object, this function. And when a post is sent through the request pipeline, the application now has a piece of middleware that's going to interrupt as it's running through. It's going to execute Morgan, and then it's going to look for static files. And then after that, it's going to say, hey, if there's something on the body, pull it out using this express.json constructor, whatever that returns, and then drop that back on the request as rec.body. And then down here, we're going to need to say app.use for our auth routes. We'll say auth router. Save that. We'll restart. All right, let's come back over here. Go back. John and password. Let's click sign up. Chrome is not happy with us because password is ridiculous. But that's okay. Good to know that Chrome's looking out for us. But this works, right? So we just posted to the form the auth route that we set up over here, just basically took that form post and just returned the body. And so now that we've got the body, we've got stuff going on there, we want to actually do something with it. We want to create a user, and we want to sign them in. So what we're going to do now is download and install a package called Passport that's going to manage that authorization process for us. All right, we're going to use a package called Passport that's going to handle all of our user authentication and authorization things for us for our application. And actually, if we run out to npmjs.com and to Passport, you'll see right here, this is kind of the default thing that most Express applications are using. You'll see we've got 1.1 million downloads last week using this application. So there's a whole bunch of documentation here that'll kind of walk through everything that you need to do around sessions and middleware and authenticating requests and strategies and all of that. And if you get stuck or if you want to go back and refer to this later, this is a great place to go. But for right now, I'm just going to do it for you so we can just jump in and start playing around with this. So let's come back over to app.js. and come up to the top. We've got Morgan, we've got Path, we've got Debug, we've got all that stuff, but what else we need is Passport. Now, what Passport does is deal with maintaining your user object in the session. That's one additional thing it does for us. And it also deals by doing that with dropping in a cookie, pulling it out of a cookie, applying it to sessions, and all those types of things. So with that being said, we need two more packages. We need Cookie Parser and Express Session. Let's come back down here, Control C out of that, and do an npm install of all of these things. We need Passport, Cookie Parser, and Express Session. Hit enter on that. We'll let those install. And if we go to package.json, as we always do, there's Cookie Parser, there's Express Session, and there's Passport. So let's jump back over to app.js, and we scroll down into our use statements. We're going to set this up, and we're going to go with it. Actually, if we run back over to the documentation real quick, and look at this, there's Cookie Parser, Express Session, right there. So back over in our app.js file, let's do app.use Cookie Parser, and we're going to do app.use session. Now, session requires a secret, and it doesn't matter what that secret is, just make it something that is secret, right? It's used to encode the cookie. Now we've got Cookie Parser ready, and we've got the session ready. So we are able to pull cookies out and deal with sessions. And so the next thing we want to do is actually just set up Passport. So we're going to work on setting Passport up from here. And so after all this is set up, we're going to do a require. And instead of writing all the code to deal with Passport right here, we're going to do the same thing we did with the routers, right? We're going to break that out to source, config, passport.js. And we need access to app as we do this, and you'll see why here in just a second. So we're going to actually pass app into this. So basically what that means, what this view looks like right here, is passport.js is going to return back a function. We haven't built that function yet, but that's what it's going to do. And then we're going to execute that function right here and pass app in. So when we go and build this file, that's what it's going to have to look like. So let's right-click on source, create a new folder called config. And this is where we would put all of our configuration information. If we wanted to do something that handled our database creation, we just left all that in the session router. We could put that in config. There's other things we can put in here. We're going to create a new file called passport.js. And this is where we're going to deal with all of our Passport code. So first thing we're going to do, const passport equals require passport. And then we're just going to go ahead and do our module.exports. Normally we create a function up at the top and then we'll export it down to the bottom. We're just going to short circuit all that and just say, hey, module.exports equals function passport config. And remember, we're passing in app. So now we have access to our Express app. We do two things when we set up Passport. Now, it's important here. One thing to note, and I've said this before, but I'll say it one more time. These pieces of middleware need to flow in order. So the first thing that happens is we have Morgan logging what's happening. Then we have a look for the static files. Then we have our body parser with express.json and express.url encoded. Then we do cookie parser. Then we do our session. In that order, that's how it works. After cookie parser and session are set up, then we can start dealing with our Passport stuff because Passport requires cookie parser and session. So we're going to put that down underneath all of the rest of this. Don't move this way up above because this has to be down under cookie parser and session. Because here we're going to do app.use. We're going to create two new pieces of middleware, passport.initialize. We'll execute that. And then app.use passport.session. And so that's why it's important that the Express session piece is already done at that point. Two other things we want to do in this little piece of code. Let's come back over to our documentation. And we'll come up here and we'll see this little section right here. This is Passport's going to maintain the login sessions. And then as a request is loaded, it's going to deserialize the user and it's going to add that to the session. Otherwise, when you're done, it's going to then serialize that user back up and drop it back on the session. Now here, what they have you doing is they're passing a user ID in, and then when they deserialize a user, when that request comes in, it's going to go and find that user in the database and pull all that information. We're not going to go quite that far, but just know that that's kind of how that works. So we need to write these two lines of code. So we're going to say passport.serialize user and passport.deserialize user. So this takes a function, and it's going to pass back in the user and the done function. So just let us know when you're done. And all we're going to do here is we're just going to pass that user object back on done. So null and user, because we just want to serialize the entire user object. So we're not going to do anything. We're going to serialize the whole object, and we're going to drop that on done, and that's going to get added to the session. Now down below here, same thing, user and done. Now what this is going to get handed is when it's deserializing the user coming out of that cookie, it's going to say, hey, here's the user that I have. And so right back over in the example in the documentation, they're passing just the ID, and then we have to go find the user. We're going to have the whole user in here, just getting the whole user. So we're just going to pass back on done, null, and user. Now the next piece of this is a strategy. If we come back over to the documentation, kind of up above, the strategy is going to handle authentication requests. It's going to be the thing that's actually doing the authentication and it's working through all that. Well, in our case, we're going to keep everything local. So what we need to do in order to tell Passport how to deal with logging a user in, we need to install and configure the local strategy. So that's what we're going to do next. So now that we've got Passport installed, we need to let Passport know when a user signs in how to authenticate that user. And so there's a variety of ways Passport will do that, and it implements that with this idea of a strategy. And so what we're going to do for this course is we're going to use a local strategy, which basically just means you're going to hand us a username and password, and we're going to figure out whether or not you're authenticated locally in our own code base instead of doing a social login or an Okta login or something like that. So if we come back over to our passport.js file, the one thing we want to do in here is encapsulate all of our local strategy code. Just like we encapsulated all of Passport right here, we're just going to pull require strategies/local strategy. And we're going to do a function. The reason for this is if we have more than one, like I'm going to show you how to implement local, but what if we have social as well? And so we want to encapsulate all of those strategies right here in config with a new folder called strategies, and then a new file called local.strategy.js. And this is where we're going to put all of our code associated with our local strategy. So in order to work with this, we need const passport equals require passport, and then we need to pull in a strategy, and we're doing a local strategy, and it's just passport local. And what passport local is going to send us back is an object, and we only want out of that object the strategy. Now that means we need to do an npm install passport local, and we'll get that. And then we'll run over to package.json, just so we're clear, passport local 1.0. And let's go back to local strategy and do our module.exports, our function, and then we'll start filling this in. So we'll say passport.use, just like we did over on the other side, passport.use. We're going to say new strategy. And all this is telling Passport, when you're using the local strategy, this is the method you're going to call to figure out whether or not somebody can be logged in. And so we're going to write the code that Passport's going to execute when it comes time to log in a new user. Okay, so the local strategy, new strategy constructor takes two pieces of information. The first one is an object. And this object is comprised of two pieces of information, the username field. And so basically we're just telling it, hey, back over on index.ejs, we're submitting a form right here to auth signup. When that form is posted, you're going to get a username called username and a password called password. And so we've got to tell the local strategy what those two fields are called. And so they're called username and password. And then we're going to send that information, that username and password, to a function. And so we need username, password, and the done callback. So now what we would do here is we would go and we would take that username and the password, we'd go to a database, we'd look up that user, validate the password, and then we'd create a user object out of that. And so let's right now just say, hey, we're going to pass in username and password, because we're not doing all of that other work yet, right? We're going to do that later when we do all the database stuff associated with this. But for right now, let's just create a user and a password, and let's actually also give them a name called Jonathan, just so you see that this is working. And then we're going to call done, say, hey, there's no errors. Notice right here, error any, so no errors, and the user we just created. And that is the local strategy. That just gets us the basics to get us there. So let's go back to our auth router and now actually execute this local strategy, right? Because we're going to do a post to sign up. And when you do a post to sign up, what we should do is create the user, right? We've got to go through and actually do all the work. Let's delete this right here to do. We're going to create the user. But then after that user is created, I actually want to do a rec.login. So basically what's happening with rec.login is this is something that's been placed on the request by Passport. They say, hey, go log in. And we're going to pass login the body of the request, which remember is the username and the password. And then we're going to execute a function. And basically this function is, hey, once I'm logged in, we're going to res.redirect. We haven't talked about redirect yet, right? So there's another response option. Res.redirect is just going to redirect to a different route. And so we're going to say, hey, redirect to auth profile. So basically what's happening here is we're going to post a sign up. And then instead of creating the user, we'll do that later, but think about this. We're going to create a user. And then that user is now created. Let's go ahead and log that user in. So that's what we're doing here. We're just calling rec login, and then we're redirecting to the profile page. Because we're going to profile. We don't have profile yet. And actually, we need now auth route, auth router.route. We're going to create a new route. And we're going to auth profile. Remember, auth is baked into the route already. So we just need to go to /profile. And we're going to do a get to rec and res. We get rec and res on the get. Now here's another new thing. So Passport has given us this login function that allows us to log a user in. It also, if the user is logged in, is going to give us a user. So let's just send res.json. We're just going to send back rec.user. We're going to save that. So let's restart our application because we stopped it when we did our install. And come back over to our web application. And let's say, hey, our username is test. Our password is password. And let's click sign up today. And there we got logged in. The user, let's look at these two things together side by side. So we sent a post to the route sign up, it logged in, then it sent a redirect to auth profile, and then profile looked inside the request and gave back a user. So all login does is take the user that we have and just creates that user on the cookie. It hasn't actually executed the strategy, that comes next, but it gets us here. So let's go back to this to-do right here and actually take the time to create the user. So we'll actually implement the MongoDB code that's going to add this user to the database. All right, let's take a minute and write the code that's going to let us create a user. So right here in the middle, to-do, create user. Well, now's the time. So let's set about making that happen. So the first thing we want to do is reach into rec.body and pull out the username and password. So let's just say const username and password equals rec.body. And basically that just destructures rec.body with username and password. And now it gives me those two things. Now we need the basics of MongoDB. And so let's go pull those from session router, the URL and the database name, and just kind of drop them in there. So hey, here's our URL, here's our DB name, and now we're ready to go. Now we've done selects from Mongo before, right? Over here in session router, we connected to the database, we connected to the collection, we did a find one of the new object, and then we rendered that back out. Or up here, we did the find to array. Now we're actually going to create the user. So we've done the queries, now let's do the adds. So let's create our self-executing function that's going to make our async await possible. So async function add user, and then we're going to create client. And we're creating it there, if you remember, because we're building a try catch block. And our catch is going to debug error. We're just going to spit the error out to the terminal. And then before we forget, down outside, let's close our client. Okay, so our client equals await Mongo client.connect to our URL. And then we're going to pull our database. Now our database is GlobalMantics. That exists this time because we created all of the session information, and that's also in the GlobalMantics database. So that database is there. Now we need to create our user, because we're going to add it next. We're just going to create an object called user that is the username and password. And then we're going to take our results from, here we go, db.collection. Now, before we had a sessions collection. This is going to be a users collection. So we're going to create a new collection that doesn't yet exist, and we're going to call it users. And then we're going to insert one. So we're only going to insert one item, user. Drop our equals in there, and then we're going to spit out the results. And then once that user is created, then we're going to do that login. But now we're not doing it with rec.body, right? We have to do it with results. And it's not even results, right? So the results is an object. It's actually going to come back on this OPS, and it's the first item. And we're going to send that to auth profile. Okay, let's save all of that and come back over to our application and say, hey, John, password, and we're going to sign up today. And it errored out. It didn't work. So let's talk a little bit about why. Why didn't this work? Because what I got, and this is important, and this is something I want to show you. We are in an async await function, and I got right here, app auth router, a promise is pending, which means that is broken. And the reason why it's broken is because we didn't do an await. And the way await works is instead of having to do a .then on the end of this promise, we just do await, and it waits for the promise to return and then sends it to result. So the fact that you get an error, and I'm leaving this in here because guaranteed at some point someone who's watching this course or working in real life or doing something is going to forget to await. And that's the error you're going to get. You're going to get promise of pending. So now we're going to do an await there. We're going to save that. And now let's do this again. John, testing, and sign up today. And I got a username, a password, and an ID. And why did I get that ID? Because that user was just created. Excellent. Now I have a user created, and we're in the database. And if we click over to our data, and we look at our collections, we now have a users collection. And that users collection has two documents. The first one was John password. That's the one that errored out. It still created the user. It just didn't wait on the promise. And the second one is John testing. And that's the user we're going to use for the next section. Because now that that's done, we want to sign in using that user. All right, now that we've got our user created, let's sign in with that username and password. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is actually create a sign-in page. So let's start with that, right? So let's look at our views. Let's right-click on views and create a new file called signin.ejs. Let's actually just let's just keep this simple, this sign-up form, and drop it into sign-in right here. And now instead of auth sign-up, we're going to go to auth sign-in. And let's save that. All right, let's go to auth routes. We've got our sign up auth route. Let's do an auth router dot route sign in dot get. We're going to actually do two. So here's the next skill we're going to learn, right? Up until now, we've done a route with a post, and we've done a route with a get. Sign in, we're going to want both, because the first, if you get sign in, we're going to send you to the sign in page. So let's create our function rec res, and then just do a res.render sign in. We'll save that. That should take us to the sign in page. So if we go to auth sign in, there's our sign in page. That's working. Excellent. But now we want to do a dot post, and we can just chain these and do the same thing. Rec res and our function. Let's lay this out just a little bit differently there. So auth router, our route is sign in. We got to get, we got to post. And now when we post, we've got rec res and like that function. And I laid this out here just to remind you, we need a function that is executed when you call the post. Now, what we want to do here is authenticate when we post to sign in. And so what actually happens, we're going to delete this back out. Passport has a built-in function, .authenticate, that is going to return that function handler for the post request. And so we just say, hey, passport.authenticate, and we're doing local. This is where you could do different strategies depending on what type of sign-in you're doing. Well, we're going to do a local sign-in, and we are going to send it two options. The first option is the success redirect. And if it's successful, we're going to go to auth profile. And if we fail, we're just going to take it back to slash. And we're going to save this. And that's all there is to it. We should now be able to sign in. And so if I come up over here and I say, John, testing, and I click sign up today, I posted to auth profile, and I got the username and password, but I also got that name. Remember when we created local strategy? We stuck this in here so you knew that it hit our local strategy. What our local strategy did was it took this username and password that were passed. If we go back to our auth router, passport.authenticate sends the username and password off the body, and we built the user object, username, password, and Jonathan off of what was there. Now, we're just taking your word for it, right? So if we come back over here, and we go back, and I say testing 1, 2, 3, and sign up today, it still worked, right? Testing, because we're not actually checking the database to see if everything worked. We're not there yet. We're just saying, hey, I got a username and password, and all local strategy is doing is just taking that username and password and creating a user and signing me in. But while we're here, while I'm signed in, let's go ahead real quick and look at user authorization now that I have a user object, right? Let's authorize some areas and see what we can lock you out of and keep you in before we go and we actually do the user validation. All right, now that I've got a user object and that user is signed in, let's lock down the sessions route and see how that works. So basically what I want to do is if we come back to the home page, the main page, I don't want you to be able to get to sessions unless you're logged in. So we're going to lock down that entire URL unless you're logged in. All right, so let's go to our sessions router. And what I want to do now is create a piece of middleware. I kept saying we'll get to middleware eventually. Now we're going to talk about middleware. We're going to build our own piece of middleware right here on this route. So right up here at the top of sessions router, we're going to do sessions router.use. So what use does is put a piece of middleware. If you remember back over in app.js, we've got middleware all over the place, right? We've got app use for the routers, we've got app use for Morgan and cookie parser and all that stuff. This is middleware. And essentially what middleware comes down to, back over on the sessions router, is it's just a function, just like everything else is. And instead of being middleware on the entire app, which we could do, but we're not going to, we're going to do a set of middleware that's going to cover all of the sessions router. So we're going to say, hey, rec, res, and next. Next is the piece that makes this middleware. And we'll talk about this. Rec and res, you already know. Rec is the request, res is the response. Next is the thing that says, hey, this piece of middleware is done with whatever it's going to do. So inside this middleware, I can do lots of things. What I want to do right now, though, is I want to check if rec.user. If passport has dropped a user on the request, then I want to carry on with the next thing. So basically just flow that through. Otherwise, we're going to redirect to sign in. So basically, if you haven't signed in, you can't get to the sessions page. That's just the way that's going to work. We'll save this. Okay, so let's go back over to our browser and refresh this page. And notice it doesn't work. Hold on. First of all, we got to go off. So we'll save that. Let's refresh this page now. We'll go back. We'll click on sessions. We're sent to sign in. If we go back again, we're going to click on sessions. Boom. The reason for that is we're not signed in, right? Remember, we're session-based. Like everything's cookie and sessions-based. And so when I saved over on sessions router, I made changes. I saved, it dropped the server and refreshed it. And since we're doing everything just in memory on session, then it dropped my session. So now I have to sign in. So let's do that. Let's say, hey, testing 1, 2, 3, and I can get to my profile. Excellent. Go back to the home page, and now I'm signed in. So when I click on sessions, I can get the sessions page because I'm signed in. If I kill this, Control-C, restart, now I try and get to the sessions page. It's going to redirect me to sign in because when I drop the server and start it back up again, I'm dropping my session. And so passport's not putting a rec.user on, so it kills the whole thing. So this is one way you can authorize a route, right? You just drop a piece of middleware in and says, hey, if everything is here, then we're good to go. What you can also do is say, hey, if rec.user.admin or .contributor or something like that, you can add pieces to this user object in order to understand whether you're an admin to get into this page or not an admin to get into that page. And where you handle that is in the local strategy, right? Because when I pull this username and password, when I do the to-do that we haven't done yet, but we're going to do next, when I pull this out of Mongo, I can have all those user pieces associated with it right here. All right, so speaking of that, let's actually do some user validation. Let's go implement this last piece in order to understand how to pull a user out of the database and then validate the password and all of that. All right, let's round this module out by actually validating our user, actually checking the user against the sign in and the password. All right, so in our local strategy, right here in this block is where we get the username and password from Passport, and we have to go through the process of validating that username and password through MongoDB, because Mongo is where we're saving our stuff. So the first thing we want to do is pull in Mongo, just like we always do, right? And then down here, you've seen me do this a couple of times, so this shouldn't be surprising, and so I'll kind of click through it a little bit fast, right? We need the URL and the DB name, so let's do that. And then we're going to get rid of this part, because we're going to do that later on. All right, let's create our immediately invoked function expression, async function, validate user, and then in here, we do the work, same as we usually do, right? So let client try catch, and then client.close. So with the catch, let's do this. Let's actually send back on done the error that we pull out of the catch, and then false, as in we don't have a user. Okay, in the try, we're going to do this kind of the same way. If we come back over to our sessions router, right? We're connecting to the client, we're connecting to the database, we're connecting to the database name. Just replicate that right there. And then we're going to say const user. We're going to go find our user equals await db.collection users.find1. And now we're looking for a specific user based upon the username that was sent to us. And now we just want to know, hey, if user exists and user.password equals the password that came in, then we're good. And we're going to send no errors, and we're going to send the user back. Otherwise, we're going to say, hey, we didn't get an error, but we also didn't get a user. That should be all it takes. So if we come back to localhost 4000 and we go to sign in, and I say test 1, 2, 3, that user doesn't exist. So I get an error that says debug is not defined in the local strategy because I added debug connected to MongoDB. But we didn't pull that in up here. So let's pull that in. But here's the thing. Why did that error show up on the browser right here? And it showed up because down here on done, we passed that back. So we actually passed an error back, and that's what got shot back up to the client. So let's save this. So when you do done error, that's what you get. Now let's go back to sign in, test 1, 2, 3. We get kicked back to sign up, which is what we expected, right? On the auth routes, we say, hey, our failure redirect is slash, our success redirect auth profile. So when I go to slash auth sign up, when I log in incorrectly, it takes me back to the home page. If I do John password, it takes me to my profile page. So I'm actually going out, I'm logging in, I'm coming back, and now it's all good. So now I'm actually validating my user. I know it's there, I know I'm good, and when I'm good, I sign you in and I bring you over to the other side. All right, let's take a minute, summarize what we've seen here, and then we'll go and talk about APIs. All right, this module we did quite a bit, right? We created users. We allowed you to sign up for this website. And in doing so, we enabled some authentication. So we validated a login and a password and sent you to a different page depending on what it was. We also enabled authorization, meaning if you're signed in, you can see sessions. If you're not signed in, you can't see sessions. And we kind of worked through all of that. And we did that using Passport. Passport is just the structure, and it's a series of pieces of middleware and functions and strategies that manage that whole user authentication authorization experience for us. Now, with all that being said, let's round out this course by giving you another option for consuming data. Up until now, we've talked about databases. Sometimes our applications need to go pull data from APIs. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about how to do that in this next module. All right, this module we did quite a bit, right? We created users. We allowed you to sign up for this website. And in doing so, we enabled some authentication. So we validated a login and a password and sent you to a different page depending on what it was. We also enabled authorization, meaning if you're signed in, you can see sessions. If you're not signed in, you can't see sessions. And we kind of worked through all of that. And we did that using Passport. Passport is just the structure, and it's a series of pieces of middleware and functions and strategies that manage that whole user authentication authorization experience for us. Now, with all that being said, let's round out this course by giving you another option for consuming data. Up until now, we've talked about databases. Sometimes our applications need to go pull data from APIs. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about how to do that in this next module. Now, in this module, we're going to introduce a little bit of a concept of structure to our code and talk about some third-party APIs, just come up with a different way to pull data into our application. Now, we are pretty much done with our journey of building out a web application with Node.js and Express. We're almost done. We've just got a couple more things to talk about just to kind of round out the experience in this course. And the first thing's going to be code structure. So right now, all of the database code, for example, is sitting inside our router, and that's not the right way to do it. We left it that way because it's easier to understand all the pieces and how they work together. But in this module, we're going to break that out a little bit and introduce this concept of a service that we're going to use to make our third-party API calls. So we'll obfuscate all that code out into a separate piece and then have the routers just call a function out of our service. Now, we're going to do that with a third-party API, which basically means I've got an API that I'm going to hand to you that's the speakers API. And so we're going to hook up to that speakers API to round out our session data on our individual session page. All right, let's get started by firing up our API and seeing how that works. All right, before we can do anything, we've got to start up an API. So let me show you what I've got for you, and then let's make sure it works. All right, if you look in the code directory for this module, you'll have the code. That's what we're working on. You'll have the Global Mantics web pages and the sessions just like we have for the last couple of modules. But now you'll also have this speakers directory. I'm going to right-click on speakers, and I'm going to open a new terminal where it's at. And so if you're on Windows, just open a terminal window and get to that directory, and then do an npm install. And that's going to install everything that we need to get this going, and then just do an npm start. Now this is going to be running on port 3000. And so on port 3000, you'll get this, which isn't super exciting or super helpful. But what we're going to want to do is actually say / speakers, and this is all the speaker information. And so this is what we want, right? So for every speaker, there's a bio for the speaker and a name and an ID and all of that. So what we're going to end up doing for the session, we're going to make a call to /speakers/session, and we're going to pull this little piece of information and pull the bio to put on the web page for the individual session. Now that we have the API up and running, let's go and start creating our service that's going to call this API for us. All right, now that we've got our API up and running, let's take some time and create a service that's going to call that API. So what we want to do is right-click on source, create a new folder called services. Just like routes or views or all of that, we're going to create one called services. We're going to create a new file called speakerservice.js. Now this is going to return a function, speaker service, and we're going to use that to encapsulate all of the details around our speaker service, and then only return back just the methods that we need. And then we're going to do a module.exports, speaker service, and we're going to execute it. So this is going to return just an object, and that's all it's going to be. All right, our function is going to have one method on it. So it's going to have a function called getSpeakerById, and we're going to pass into it an ID. And now we're using something called the revealing module pattern, which means our speaker service is going to have a bunch of functions on it. We're only going to create one, but in theory, and then it's going to return an object. with those methods on it. And so when speaker service is executed, basically this function will cobble together the speaker service, return that as an object, and that's what the calling method is going to have access to. All right, now ultimately, this speaker service is going to do one thing, right? It's going to make a call to that third-party API, and it's going to return data. And since it's doing something that's asynchronous, we need to return a promise. So we're going to say return new promise. And a promise takes a function, and you have resolve and reject. And so what we want to do is make a call to the API, and then if it works, we resolve the promise. And if it doesn't work, we reject the promise. So that's what we're going to do. The way we're going to make a call to the API is with a tool called Axios. So const Axios equals require Axios. And let's do, for the last time in this course, npm install Axios. And just to round it out in our package.json, there's Axios 0.21.1. All right. So what Axios is going to do is make those HTTP calls for us. And so we're just going to do an axios.get to HTTP localhost 3000/speakers/ID. That's what we want right there. And that's going to return a promise of its own. So we're going to want to do a .then, and it's going to hand us a response. And that response is what we want to pass through. So we're going to resolve the response. And then if something breaks, we're going to catch an error, and we're going to reject the error. So let's save that. That should be all there is to it. And now we have this service that manages all the interactions with this API. So now that we have that service created, let's go through the process of calling that service in our sessions route. All right, now that we have the service created, let's do what it takes to call the service and get that extra piece of data added to our application. All right, so if we go into our sessions router, we want to pull in this service. So we const speaker service equals require the speaker service. So we got to go down a level to services to speaker service. And now this is just how easy this process is. If we go down into the :ID and we work our way down through here, right here, we end up with a session. And once we have that session, all we want to do is call the speaker service dot get speaker by ID, and we're going to pass session, the session that we got back, dot speakers. And remember, speakers is an array. And so for the purposes of this, we're just going to pull the first speaker dot ID. We're going to pull the ID associated with that speaker. And what this is going to hand us back is a speaker. And remember, the speaker service returns a promise. And so we await that promise. And now we've got a speaker from the speaker service. That's all it took. Just that one line. Like with Mongo, since we didn't break that out of service, we got to type all this code every time. Because we broke speaker service out into a service, it's just this one line of code. And then we're going to say, hey, guess what? Session.speaker equals speaker.data. Because we're just returning the Axios response. So we actually just need data off of speaker. And let's save that. And then in our session.ejs page, here we're pulling speaker sub 0. And we've now created a new thing just called speaker. And we also added a speaker bio to this page as well. So let's save that. Let's open up our browser. And in localhost 4000, we're going to go to sessions. It's going to blow up because we don't have access to sessions because we haven't signed in. So we're going to sign in now. And now that we're signed in, we're going to go to /sessions. And now we get this full list. I'm going to click learn more. And notice I have my speaker name, but I also have my speaker bio that came out of our session API. And actually, if you look at the terminal window that's running this, you'll see I've been calling this API. I've called it a couple of times now as we went. So that's it. That's all there was to it. So you encapsulate all this code to go out and call your third-party APIs, and you encapsulate that in this service. And all it takes to run that service is just this one line of code, await speaker service.get speaker by ID, and that's it. And that's the course. So let's take a minute and summarize everything we've done here. You have successfully finished your journey on building out a web application with Node.js and Express. And we rounded out this course with a module on building out a structure using services to encapsulate your code out of your routers and just having all of that service code separated out so that in order to call this third-party API that we were using for speakers, it just took one line of code embedded in your router to get all of that done. And so that rounds out the course. You've got a web application with Node and Express that's got all the tooling wrapped around it, that's building some routers to display some pages. You've got a MongoDB database on the back end that's serving up session information. And then you've got now a third-party API that you're calling to get the speaker information. And so hopefully you've gotten a lot out of this course. And if you have questions, don't forget to join the chat down below on the discussion tab. Thanks a lot for watching.